Unknown signal detected. Conscription order issuing. Mortal, your moment of glory has arrived. From this very instant you shall join the great Silver Heart Empire. Morning. Li Xin opened his eyes and climbed up from the narrow single bed. He glanced at the cramped little window on one side of the room. Outside, the sky was still shrouded in dim gloom. The light of the star had yet to shine upon this planet called Guansuo 4. It was still early, yet Li Xin had already lost all desire to sleep, perhaps the lingering effect of his ingrained biological clock. Li Xin was a newly graduated military trainee. 8 long years of training and study had armed him with fundamental military knowledge as well as the rudiments of a field officer's skills. Though he had now formally graduated, the habits forged over those years were not so easily cast aside. The room was exceedingly narrow. Besides Li Xin's single bed, piles of mechanical odds and ends crowded the space, assorted tools, oil-stained bearings and simple repair instruments cluttered every corner. Even beneath the steel pipe bedframe, every inch was crammed with mechanical components. Li Xin stepped out of the room into a repair shop flanked on both sides by shelves overloaded with jumbled spare parts. At the center stood a workbench. Li Xin looked at the massive mechanical arm resting on it and his brows could not help but knit together. There was no other reason. This mechanical arm was simply too old. Rough, outdated parts made up its bulk, its surface caked in black grime where dust and machine oil had mingled over the years. Li Xin could no longer even recall the model of this arm. It was at least 3 to 5 decades old. When he returned last year, this thing was nowhere to be seen. It seemed it had only been purchased sometime this year. To large corporations, this mechanical arm was undeniably obsolete. Yet for a small civilian repair shop like this, it was only just past its break-in period. 90% new, a rare treasure. Li Xin patted the arm and gave it a quick inspection, checking whether anything seemed amiss. Fortunately, though the mechanical arm looked dirty and aged, its maintenance was passable. Li Xin shifted his gaze to the workbench before him where a rifle lay. As a military trainee, Li Xin was intimately familiar with this weapon. X-49? It was a gunpowder-based rifle with a 7.8mm caliber using magazines for ammunition. Its standard magazine held 30 rounds, and in special combat situations it could be fitted with an extended magazine. Durable and long-lasting, this weapon still existed in vast numbers on the planet Guansuo 4. This was already the interstellar age. Countless advanced weapons emerged one after another, and even individual infantry arms had undergone tremendous development. Laser rifles, electromagnetic rifles, Gauss rifles, plasma rifles, each had been successfully developed and even deployed on a large scale. Yet the number of X-49 gunpowder rifles in service was far from small. The reason was in truth rather simple. Though gunpowder weapons suffered from various shortcomings in this age, their greatest advantages were their low cost, ease of maintenance and respectable lethality. Against an unarmored target, whether struck by a laser round, an electromagnetic slug or a gunpowder bullet, there was ultimately no difference once the shot found flesh. It was just like in the ancient Blue Star era. Even when superpowers had begun to deploy carriers and fighter jets, primitive tribes still hunted with spears. Most of the time a weapon only needed to be capable of killing the enemy. Whether death came from the bombardment of a heavy warplane or the thrust of a spear, it likely made little difference to the dead. The rifle on the workbench was clearly here for repair, and it was not the only one. Underneath the bench sat an entire crate filled with weapons, all awaiting maintenance. Li Xin picked up the rifle and briskly worked the bolt to inspect it. The fault was straightforward. The feed system had been damaged, as though the weapon had been smashed against something. For such a minor issue, if conditions allowed, one could simply replace the parts. On Guansuo, for the X-49 was simply too common. That ubiquity meant spare components were easy to find. Li Xin first stripped the rifle down completely, then examined the damaged pieces. The extent of the damage was somewhat worse than he had anticipated. He turned and walked toward a nearby shelf piled high with assorted components. Metal clinked and rattled as his hands dug through the heap, and before long he fished out the exact part he needed from the chaos. After fitting the nearly pristine replacement parts, Li Xin reassembled the rifle. Click! Listening to the sound of the bolt cycling, he checked it once more. The firearm was now fully restored. He placed the rifle into a clean crate set off to the side, then reached into the box of damaged weapons and drew out another. Noting the dried black stains on its surface, Li Xin's expression did not change. He knew exactly what they were. It was dried blood. Clearly, when these weapons were ruined, their original owners had likely been ruined along with, but Li Xin had long since grown used to this. Guansuo 4 was not a safe world to begin with. Bloodshed and death were all too commonplace here. So early in the morning, all that clanging and banging. What, trying to send me to my grave sooner? A raspy gong-like voice sounded behind Li Xin, followed by heavy footsteps drawing nearer. Before the man even reached him, the thick stench of sweat mixed with engine oil had already washed over Li Xin. He paid it no mind, silently continuing his work on the weapon before him. A thick muscular arm carpeted in black hair reached out and snatched up the rifle Li Xin had just repaired. The booming voice erupted again. Idiot. Do new parts cost you nothing? You just slap them in like that. He jabbed a finger at the discarded components on the workbench. These could still be fixed and used, you know. Why replace them already? Li Xin turned his head toward the speaker, a middle-aged man whose declining physical condition had left a soft swell of fat around his belly. His legs were gone, replaced by a pair of relatively old mechanical prosthetics. This was Li Xin's second uncle Li Duong, his caretaker and the first person he had seen after crossing over into this era as an infant. At this moment Li Duong's brows were screwed tightly together as he looked at Li Xin with undisguised disdain, as though Li Xin had committed some unforgivable sin. Li Xin picked up the removed parts and said, "It's fine. You'll just fix these and turn them into a 99% new anyway. Useless brat with skills like yours, I've no idea how you even managed to graduate. Don't bother going to the company, people there will skin you alive with their tongues. I have to clean up after even this little bit of work. You'd better practice with me for a few more years." Face dark with irritation, Li Duong shoved Li Xin aside and began bustling over the workbench himself. Seeing this, Li Xin held his tongue. He had long since grown accustomed to such treatment. He wiped the grease from his hands, picked up a tube of energy paste, opened it with practiced ease and squeezed the contents into his mouth. Energy paste was the staple food of those living on Guansu or Four. It generally had no real flavor, only a strong industrial tang. People had no real choice, tasteless as it contained everything needed to sustain life. For those whose bodies were already in decline like Li Duong, frequent consumption could even lead to fat accumulation. A single tube could meet an adult's needs for an entire day. The energy within it was formidable. Li Xin finished the plastic-wrapped energy paste, squeezing it flat and spotless before he was satisfied. With a rattling clang, someone slapped the rolling shutter of the repair shop. "Anyone there? Open up." Yeah, I'm coming." "What are you doing hammering away at dawn, summoning spirits?" Li Duong bellowed back, his raspy voice dripping with resentment. Yet he still dutifully rolled the shutter open. Squinting into the dim light, he peered at the two people standing outside. Outside the door, a middle-aged man in a uniform likewise narrowed his eyes slightly. He wore glasses and said, "I'm here for Li Xin." "He lives here, correct?" "Looking for Li Xin?" "Who are you? What do you want?" Li Duong frowned at the visitor, the rolling shutter door only half raised. His eyes were filled with wariness, for on the planet Guansu first a clean and tidy uniform signified that the person was a corporate employee of no low rank. Someone of such status clearly had no reason to be here. Before the middle-aged man outside could speak, Li Xin's voice came from behind. "They're looking for me." Then he placed one hand against the rolling shutter, pushed upward with slight force and lifted it all the way open. "Please come in." Li Xin gestured to the two at the door. Li Duong cast a suspicious glance at both Li Xin and the visitors. The two outside resembled a father and son, sharing certain facial features. The younger man nodded first, then followed Li Xin into the cramped repair shop. The middle-aged man frowned, clearly displeased by the messy repair shop. But thinking of his son's problem, he suppressed his discomfort and entered. Leading the way, Li Xin kicked aside a mechanical part blocking the path, guiding the two into his room. Li Duong tried to follow but was stopped by Li Xin. Li Duong, half a head shorter than Li Xin, looked up with a frown. Li Xin looked down and said, "The room is too small, don't come in." "HMPH. Fine, I want to see what you're up to." Li Duong snorted and turned away. Bang! Li Xin closed the door and looked at the two in the room. They were both sitting on his bed. The young man looked nervous, not entirely because the room was too cramped. The middle-aged man appeared much calmer. "Li Xin? I?" The young man clearly knew Li Xin, but now his words were halting. "Baimu, long time no see." Li Xin smiled in greeting. Baimu quickly responded low. "Long time no see." After the greeting, Baimu seemed less nervous and fidgety. "Hello, Uncle Bai," Li Xin greeted the middle-aged man beside. He was Bai Chuan, also Baimu's father. Bai Chuan nodded, curtly disinclined for small talk. He said, "You must know why we came." Li Xin, upon hearing this, sat down heavily on a pile of parts, his gaze calm as he nodded, "I know. I've brought the contract and what you want. If you have no objection, sign the contract and it's yours." Bai Chuan took a contract and a boxed item from his briefcase. Li Xin's gaze first went to the box in Bai Chuan's hand, then to the contract. He said calmly, "May I see them first?" Bai Chuan said nothing, just handed both items to Li Xin. Even though one of the items was quite valuable, Bai Chuan was not concerned. His status was far above someone like Li Xin. As long as Li Xin was sensible, he wouldn't try any tricks. Li Xin held the two items, but inside he was not as calm as his face showed. One was an employment contract, the other a vial of medicine. Both would bring earth-shattering changes to Li Xin's fate. He first placed the boxed vial on his lap and began to examine the contract. The first thing that caught his eye was the contract title under Biotechnology Group Employment Contract. Li Xin's gaze moved down to his personal information already filled in on the form. Li Xin did not linger on the form. His personal information was not highly classified, so it wasn't a major issue that someone had obtained it and filled it in first. Turning the page, he saw a list of clauses detailing salary and benefits as well as the work obligations Li Xin would have to fulfill. At the end, Li Xin saw a line: "This employee has voluntarily signed a dispatch agreement and will be sent to Hengan Security Company within 7 working days of employment." Only the name space was left blank, waiting for Li Xin to sign his name. Having finished reviewing the contract, Li Xin sighed softly. Though he had long been mentally prepared, even had actively sought this outcome, when the contract was truly before him he realized he had overestimated himself. Lanta Biotechnology Group was the ruler of many cities on this land. Becoming an employee of this group was the aspiration of everyone living here. Li Xin was no exception. Without the subsidiary clause, this contract would have been impossible for him to obtain even if he sold himself several times over. The problem lay in the subsidiary clause. Hengan Security Company was a subsidiary under the Security Department of Lanta Biotechnology Group. Not wholly owned but with held shares. And the current location of Hengan Security was in a war zone. The enemy was the Milder Knights, a fellow human colonist force. The two sides belonged to different factions, each occupying considerable territory and settlements on this planet. Signing this contract meant that after employment, Li Xin would be dispatched to the war zone by Lanta Biotechnology, to a company that was relatively unsafe. That was not good news. Yet Li Xin also knew that it was precisely because of this that the contract had fallen into his hands. Originally, this contract was meant for Bai Mu, who had pulled strings via his father Bai Chuan to skip many requirements and directly join Lanta Biotechnology Group. But who could have predicted that this once desirable opportunity would turn into honey-coated poison? Thus Bai Chuan needed a substitute for his son. He needed someone to take the fall, and Li Xin needed a future. They both got what they wanted. At this moment, Li Xin turned his attention to the other item. He slowly opened the box. What came into view was a vial of pale blue liquid. He took it out. Inside the liquid, tiny star-like specks flickered faintly. Li Xin gazed at the vial with almost obsessive admiration. This was the thing that could overturn his destiny, the condition for which he was willing to sign the contract. Inside the box were instructions for the vial's use: a silver needle and its name: No. 7 Spiritual Energy Stimulation Compound. Spiritual energy is the key to human strength, the formidable reliance that allows humanity to traverse the stars. Yet mastering it is far from a simple endeavor. Unless one is born into a family with a hereditary gift of spiritual energy, all others must use potions to stimulate their bodies in order to attain it. No. 7 Spiritual Energy Stimulation Compound was precisely such a potion. Li Xin gazed at the potion in his hand, at the needle gleaming with cold light inside the box. He only needed to assemble the syringe, press it against his own neck and deliver a firm injection. That would be it. The rest depended on whether his body could withstand the process and whether his spiritual energy could be successfully awakened. As if reading Li Xin's thoughts, Bai Chuan said calmly, "I don't think you'd want to inject that here. Even if you succeeded, you'd be an illegal spiritual energy user. If caught, you'd face death." Li Xin withdrew the longing in his eyes and reluctantly placed the syringe and potion back. Only then did he say, "Of course not. I know the rules well." Despite his words, Li Xin's gaze never left the No. 7 Spiritual Energy Stimulation Compound. With immense resolve, he finally put it back and closed the box. Then Li Xin picked up the contract and glanced at Bai Mu. Bai Mu obligingly handed him a pen and an ink pad. Even in the interstellar age, signing documents remained so simple. Of course, Li Xin knew this was due to his low status. If his rank were higher or the contract more significant, the signing process would involve far more: blood sampling, retinal scans, and even chip authorization among a series of verifications. But for now, a signature and a fingerprint sufficed. Having signed his own indenture, Li Xin let out a long, heavy breath and handed it to Bai Chuan. Seeing Li Xin's demeanor, Bai Chuan shook his head slightly and said, "Don't look so reluctant. I gave you this opportunity only because you're Bai Mu's friend. Joining Blueprint as a full employee, even if it means being sent to the war zone or living there for life, people would still scramble for it." Li Xin composed himself and nodded. "Uncle Bai is right. This is indeed my good fortune." Bai Chuan's words were not wrong. Finding someone to take the fall for Bai Mu was not difficult. Even for this contract, which required a specially designated position with 8 years of basic military training and multiple commendations as an outstanding cadet. On the planet Gansu Osa there was no shortage of people, only an abundance. Offering this chance to Li Xin was in truth Bai Chuan and Bai Mu's way of looking after him. For Bai Mu he could choose a better, safer and risk-free job to join Blueprint, so this war zone position held little appeal. But for others including Li Xin this was already a costly Liffey indenture contract. Bai Chuan packed the contract into his briefcase. After a moment's thought he said, given your current state I think you should think carefully before injecting. After all, taking the potion isn't necessarily a good thing. Once you inject the spiritual energy stimulation potion it will no longer be under your control. My personal advice is to sell it. At the very least it could improve your life and work. He glanced around the room before continuing, at the very least it could upgrade your living conditions. Li Xin nodded. Thank you, Uncle Bai. I'll seriously consider it. Bai Chuan could see Li Xin's perfunctory tone but said no more, rising to leave with his son. Seeing this, Li Xin quickly opened the door. Outside stood a burly man, Li Guang, who appeared to have been eavesdropping. No wonder there had been no repair sounds from outside during their conversation. As the door opened, Li Guang hurriedly turned away, feigning busyness. Li Xin glanced at him but said nothing, instead escorting Bai Chuan and Bai Mu to the entrance. Bai Chuan said, all right, see you off here. Okay, Uncle Bai. Li Xin nodded. Bai Mu added, goodbye, Li Xin. I hope to hear good news from you. Li Xin smiled faintly. You'll only hear good news from me. A smile spread across Bai Mu's face as well. Then father and son boarded a nearby car and with a soft hum of the engine the vehicle drove away. Li Xin watched the car disappear even after its taillights were no longer visible before turning around. As he turned he found Li Guang standing not far behind watching him. Li Xin said nothing, heading back to his room. He picked up the boxed potion and packed it into a black backpack. Seeing Li Xin about to leave, Li Guang could no longer hold back. Do you really have to go to Hengan security? I heard it's a war zone. And this potion, can you not inject it? I heard the success rate for spiritual energy injection is so low and there's a chance of failure. This card has your father's death benefits. Maybe you shouldn't go. It's enough to find you a wife. At this moment Li Guang had shed his usual fierce expression. Worry etched his face as he held out the card. Li Xin took the card, glanced at it, then smiled and patted it back onto Li Guang's chest. The contract is signed. How can I not go? Has been dead for over a decade. Even if there were benefits they'd have been spent by now. Keep this money for your retirement, or if you want, find yourself a woman. Don't worry. I won't be a failure. I'll only succeed. Li Guang's face paled and he muttered under his breath, unable to form a coherent response. Given his temper, saying so much without losing his cool was already remarkable. Li Xin patted Li Guang on the shoulder and said calmly, old man, you've spent your whole life in this cramped repair shop to raise me, scrimping and saving to put me through school. I know it hasn't been easy. Now that I've come of age and graduated, the repair shop isn't bad, but spending my whole life here isn't the life I want. Since you have money and don't need to support me anymore while that thing downstairs still works, find a woman. Who knows, you might even give me a little brother. Li Guang sighed. You're just like your father. But you have a point. It's time to stop spending money on you. I'll find a woman tomorrow. After hearing this, Li Xin turned around with a satisfied smile, slung his black bag across his chest and walked out of the repair shop. He did not look back, for he knew that Li Guang was surely watching him at this moment. Li Xin was uncertain whether this departure would grant him another chance to return. The farewell he had just shared with Li Guang, at least on the surface, was a cheerful one. He could not afford to turn back and ruin the atmosphere. Li Xin strode forward with large steps, while behind him Li Guang, moving with heavy mechanical prosthetics, also reached the doorway. It was just as Li Xin had stood there moments ago, watching the Bai Chuan father and son depart. This man stood at the entrance, watching Li Xin's silhouette gradually fade into the distance. The tall, upright figure etched itself into Li Guang's eyes, and in that instant he felt as though he had been transported back over a decade. Back then he had also watched another person's silhouette recede into the distance in the same manner. That person was Li Xin's father, also Li Guang's elder brother. At this moment the two silhouettes were so strikingly similar. Li Guang's eyes grew moist as he gazed at the two similar silhouettes, the receding figures bathed in the light of the star. Only after Li Xin's figure vanished around the corner, no longer visible, did Li Guang let out a long, wistful sigh. He turned to look at the repair shop where he had lived for so many years, clutched the card in his hand, reached out and pulled down the rolling shutter door. After locking up, he muttered to himself, Li Xin is right. I should find myself a woman too. Li Xin walked out of the alley side softly and hailed a taxi. To the psionic center? Right away. The driver acknowledged and the car swiftly started moving. He glanced at Li Xin in the rearview mirror, also eyeing the bag on Li Xin's chest. Unable to resist striking up a conversation, he asked, are you going for psionic stimulation? Li Xin drew a pistol from his waist, casually placing it on his thigh, and said, ask what you should and what you shouldn't. Don't ask. The driver gave an awkward smile. Seeing the loaded pistol in Li Xin's hand, he dared not say anything more. Although gun control in this city was not particularly strict, those who actually carried firearms were still few in number. The driver had no desire to find out whether the gun in Li Xin's hand was real, nor did he dare gamble on whether it was loaded. Throughout the journey, the car drove smoothly with buildings and crowds rapidly receding on either side. Li Xin turned his gaze out the window where they passed a construction site. The site was bustling with intense activity. The workers here were not solely humans but also included the native race of Guansu or Four. The Chilu tribe? This was a bipedal avian race that had lost the ability to fly, yet they were still intelligent beings. After humanity conquered this planet, they were used as slaves and laborious. Mining construction sites and the basic tasks in highly hazardous chemical industries were all carried out by these Chilu tribesmen. Humans had even specially developed suitable tools for them all to accelerate their work efficiency. After the car passed the site, Li Xin withdrew his gaze. His destination was not far from here. Soon the car came to a stop. Li Xin pulled out a handful of change, paid the fare and got out. Standing before the gates of this colossal building, Li Xin looked up at the towering edifice. He turned his head, surveying the surroundings, and sighed softly. This was the true city. The place where they lived was merely the commoners' district or even the slums. Li Xin did not linger long at the entrance. The area was densely packed with people coming and going. Psionic stimulation and awakening were extremely difficult for Li Xin, who lived in the slums, but for the city as a whole it was not the case. Upon entering the building, even Li Xin, dressed in ordinary clothes, did not attract any unusual looks. Because this was far too common here. From the wealthy in fine attire to the poor in tattered clothes, all were a common sight. For the rich, the potion for psionic stimulation was merely a small expense, while for the poor such an attempt might represent the accumulated wealth of several generations. After passing through security, Li Xin was left with only that one box of potion. Everything else was temporarily stored away. In the air, small flying robots guided everyone who entered, leading them to their designated places. A flying robot soon appeared before Li Xin. He looked up, examining the machine. It was a spherical robot. From its exterior, no propulsion system for flight was visible, so its movement relied entirely on the building's infrastructure. Welcome, Commoner. Assistant Unit 9527 at your service. Please state your needs in concise language. Li Xin said, I need to use a psionic stimulation potion to activate my psionic powers. The red signal light in the center of the spherical robot flickered, then it said, your command is understood. Please follow me. Pay attention to the green dotted line below. The robot then changed direction and led Li Xin toward an elevator on one side. Once inside the elevator, the floor numbers were rapidly illuminated. Li Xin looked at the number 36 displayed ahead and waited in silence. Ding! A crisp sound rang out as Li Xin reached the target floor. He followed Robot 9527 as it moved forward. Li Xin was not the only one on this floor. The entire row of elevators opened from time to time, and with each opening a person stepped out. There were not only those emerging from the elevators but also people leaving through the corridor, their steps unsteady. After traversing a long hallway and turning several times, Li Xin followed the robot into a room. As Li Xin entered, the room's door closed simultaneously. The room was extremely sparse. In this space of about 15 square meters there was only an integrated alloy table and chair placed in the center. Apart from that there was nothing else in the room. Li Xin walked over and sat down. The 9527 robot descended, and with a signal light below it glowing, a projection appeared on the table. It was a contract. Commoner, please read the risk disclosure contract carefully. Sign it once you have confirmed everything. Li Xin looked at the projected contract. It detailed all the precautions after psionic stimulation, including the procedures if activation failed or if he did not succeed. After reading it carefully, Li Xin nodded and said, no issues, but how do I sign it? Watch my signal light. When the green light turns on, please state your confirmation to sign the agreement. With that, the robot's green signal light illuminated. Confirm signing the agreement. Li Xin's calm voice rang out. Beep. Please take out the psionic stimulation potion and place it on the table for inspection. Li Xin quickly retrieved the potion, assembled the syringe and other components and placed it on the alloy table before him. As a beam of light shifted through various colors, the robot appeared to be scanning the vial of potion. When the light turned off, the robot spoke again. Inspection complete. Target identified as No. 7 psionic stimulation compound. Purity 35, grade D1. Commoner, this potion is not recommended for use. Probability of successful psionic activation 1015. Probability of failure 2035. Probability of aberration 5070. If you wish to proceed, please confirm again. Li Xin exhaled. From the data he had gathered, grade D1 was the lowest tier of this potion. Anything worse would be considered waste. But what choice did he have? This was the only potion he could obtain. Li Xin's gaze was calm as he said, confirmed. Proceed with the injection. Record the command. Initiating the injection of compound No. 7 spiritual energy stimulant. Please remove the upper body clothing. Li Xin complied, taking off his upper garment upon hearing this. 9527 slowly descended, extending 2 small mechanical arms from the side, which then grasped the vial of medicine. It flew to Li Xin's side, and then one of the mechanical arms used its built-in nozzle to spray alcohol disinfectant onto Li Xin's neck. Hiss! As the sharp needle pierced Li Xin's neck, the mechanical arm injected the medicine into his body. In an instant after the injection, Li Xin felt an indescribable sensation as if something searing hot had been infused into his body. Citizen, the No. 7 spiritual energy stimulant will take effect within 13 minutes after injection. Please prepare yourself mentally. Wishing you success in activating your spiritual energy. Li Xin looked at the robot before him and said, thank you. I will definitely succeed. The robot did not reply further but flew to the ceiling and attached itself there, using the scanner below to focus on Li Xin. Li Xin said nothing more, sitting upright in the chair with his eyes closed, awaiting the arrival of his uncertain fate. For many, activating spiritual energy is a gamble for survival. Even with the injection of spiritual energy stimulants, not everyone can activate their spiritual energy. According to the materials Li Xin had reviewed, even using better medications, the failure rate remained significantly high. He had once seen a statistical table showing that for the No. 7 spiritual energy stimulant, the success rate for B2 level usage was only 28, with a failure rate as high as 46 and a mutation rate of 26. This was already considered a relatively good medication. The B, C and D category stimulants were all divided into 5 levels, with level 1 being the lowest and level 5 the highest. The gap between Li Xin's D1 level and the B2 level stimulant was like the difference between heaven and earth, for just the level alone was a difference of 12 tiers, not to mention the disparities in other aspects. Li Xin's chances of success were minimal, while the probabilities of failure and mutation were substantially higher. Yet this was his only option. He was a time traveler who had lived in Blue Star in his previous life. How he died was unknown, but during his life he was just a corporate drone, spending each day at work and then sleeping. Having already experienced the life of someone at the bottom of society, Li Xin did not want to remain trapped in that position for another lifetime. Moreover, life here was different from Blue Star. At least on Blue Star, corporate drones could indulge in some junk food despite the abundance of technology and harsh realities. But that at least had flavor. In the societal underbelly of Guangzhou, for not only was life security unguaranteed, but the food lacked taste as well. Li Xin had been consuming industrially produced energy paste for over a decade. He was used to it, but that did not mean he enjoyed it. He wanted to rise to the pinnacle of life, to savor something flavorful rather than relying on energy paste every day. It was either rise or die. Li Xin had only one path to choose: success. However, as he thought about this, he suddenly sensed something was amiss. Why did these 3 minutes feel so prolonged? In this realization, he found that his body had become immobile, as if it had turned rigid. Li Xin was bewildered, cursing inwardly. Damn it, why am I thinking so much this time? This won't throw me into a deathly reminiscence, will it? Gradually he felt increasingly uneasy. His body began to heat up as if a furnace was burning within his chest. White smoke began to waft from Li Xin's forehead, and beads of sweat were forming all over his body. This was his body's instinctive response trying to cool him down, and otherwise under such high temperatures even interstellar humans could not endure for long. If this state persisted any longer, his internal organs would be scorched. At the very least, his brain would surely be fried. Yet none of this was something Li Xin could control. While conscious, he could only roar impotently within. Even with all his might, he could only make his fingers tremble slightly. He was incapable of any other movements. Within his body it felt like a volcano was on the verge of erupting. Soon Li Xin saw small bulges forming on his arm, as if tiny rodents were scurrying beneath his skin. No, not just one, it felt like 10 or more tiny mice were darting around beneath the skin of Li Xin's arm. This was only what Li Xin could see, limited by his inability to move. There could be much more lurking beyond his vision, potentially even more terrifying. Li Xin was genuinely panicking, his eyes filled with terror. He even felt a tingling sensation on his face as a twisted tentacle sprouted from it, the tender fleshy appendage appearing bright pink and vividly alive in Li Xin's sight. Li Xin, unable to move his eyeballs, could only watch the tentacle writhing in front of him. He roared within, what the hell, more tentacles too? In the room, the mechanical voice of Robot 9527 rang out. Alarm! Alarm! Citizen in a state of mutation. Preparing for mutation clearance. As 9527's voice echoed, the ceiling was suddenly opened and a massive electromagnetic rifle extended from it. At that moment, Li Xin seemed to regain some control over his body. He heard 9527's voice and nervously raised his head. However, this action consumed a lot of his time. By the time he raised his gaze, he was already staring down the barrel of the gun. This was an electromagnetic rifle with at least a 20mm caliber. Although the caliber was a bit large, it truly was a rifle. As a military trainee, Li Xin noticed the equipment hanging below the rifle. A flamethrower. Oh no. A thought flashed through Li Xin's mind without rhyme or reason. If he were to get shot in the head by this caliber rifle and then incinerated by the flamethrower, cleaning up this room would be a breeze. No wonder this room was devoid of anything. It must have been designed for easy cleaning. With this thought in mind, Li Xin's eyes widened in fury. He could not die, at least not in this cramped room. He had yet to taste anything flavorful on Guansu or Four, and he had never experienced the taste of interstellar women in this lifetime. I must succeed. Finally, Li Xin could speak. His voice was intermittent, but every word felt as if he had expended all his strength to roar it out. Boom! An arc of electricity erupted from Li Xin's body, the pale blue arc sweeping across the entire room. Crackle! In an instant, the room was filled with the acrid smell of ozone burned by the electrical discharge. Li Xin finally regained his ability to move. The writhing skin on his arms and body ceased its motion, and even the tentacle on his face slowly retracted beneath his skin. Li Xin stared in disbelief at his hand, recalling the arc of electricity that had just erupted, and eventually his vision faded to white as he lost consciousness. Li Xin was unconscious. However, Robot 9527 remained fully alert. As a robot of the Spiritual Energy Center, everything in this room was equipped with the ability to defend against spiritual energy attacks, albeit at a low protection level. Yet for a newly awakened spiritual energy user like Li Xin, this level of defense against his spiritual energy attacks was more than sufficient. 9527 descended from the ceiling, hovering silently above the alloy table. Distortion alert cancelled. At the same time, the massive electromagnetic rifle barrels that had extended earlier slowly retracted. The robot remained still, waiting for Li Xin to regain consciousness. Finally, after an unknown span of time, the dazed Li Xin slowly woke up. Opening his eyes, he struggled to rise, feeling as though his body had been drained. The sensation was even more hollow than the emptiness he felt after multiple rounds in his past life. He slowly got up and sat on the chair. The robot before him used its underside scanner to examine Li Xin's body. Congratulations, civilian. Your spiritual energy has been successfully activated. Please follow me to the 21st floor to register your spiritual energy information. Li Xin struggled to stand but found himself still weak all over. He said, I don't have the strength right now. Can we wait a moment? 9527 signal light flickered as it replied, civilian, according to our detection, your physical condition is due to the illusion of spiritual energy depletion. Your bodily functions are not in a state of weakness. Please try to begin moving. This will help you master your spiritual energy and prevent distortion. Despite these words, 9527 waited at the doorway for Li Xin. Upon hearing the robot's words, Li Xin understood the situation. Yet understanding the cause did not make it easy to shake off this state. After a long mental preparation, Li Xin finally stood up, trembling. Once on his feet, he realized that, as the robot had said, his physical stamina was not diminished. In fact, he even felt a certain enhancement in his strength. Could this be the physical transformation brought about by the activation of spiritual energy? Li Xin pondered this in his mind, but his steps did not falter. After putting on his clothes, he followed the robot slowly. Along the way, he encountered others who had also come up. Those in the know cast envious glances at Li Xin as he followed the robot toward the elevator. They understood that such a state usually indicated successful spiritual energy activation. As for those who failed, they now lay in the rooms awaiting rescue. And those who distorted had already turned into charred remains. Li Xin paid little heed to the gazes of others. He staggered into the elevator and watched as it gradually stopped at the 21st floor. 9527 led Li Xin out of the elevator. The corridor here had far fewer people than the one on the 36th floor. Along the way, Li Xin saw only two others, both as stiff and unsteady on their feet as he was. Following 9527 into a room, Li Xin found it much like the previous one, starkly simple. Alacast walls, clean floors, and empty integrated tables and chairs. Following 9527's instructions, Li Xin sat down to wait. Please wait. There is currently a queue. Estimated wait time 23 to 27 minutes. There was nothing to do but wait. Li Xin sat in the chair waiting in boredom. The room contained nothing, not even something to read. With nothing to do, time seemed to crawl by at an agonizingly slow pace. Li Xin could only slowly move his body, hoping to regain full control over it as quickly as possible. Finally, after waiting 26 minutes, one of the alloy walls slid open and a woman in a silver-white uniform walked out, accompanied by a wheeled robot half her height. Li Xin's gaze fell upon the woman and he could hardly look away. Having lived in the city's slums and undergone 8 years of basic military training, Li Xin had not seen such a beautiful woman in many years. Were there women in the slums? Certainly. But subsisting on nutritional paste, toiling tirelessly and lacking time to groom themselves, how could they be attractive? This woman was different, her skin was fair, her features lovely and her figure exquisite. Even Li Xin, who had seen countless beauties enhanced by filters in his past life, had to admit she was truly exceptional. His eye swept over the nameplate on her chest. After reading the information, he quickly averted his gaze, daring only to look at the alloy table before him. The nameplate read M2D10 Assistant Supervisor Jiao Bingyang. The ruler of this city was the Blueprint Biotechnology Group. All official institutions in the city were subordinate departments of the group. The Spiritual Energy Center was naturally under Blueprint Biotechnology Group as well. Within the group there was a strict hierarchy starting from M1. The contract Li Xin had signed today meant he was joining the group at the rank of M1 in turn. Though the job rank seemed only one level apart, their status within Blueprint was worlds apart. This was because Blueprint Biotechnology Group had an additional employee rank system beneath the job ranks. M1 was divided into 5 sublevels, as was M2. As an intern joining Blueprint Biotechnology Group, Li Xin's full rank would likely be M1D1 or possibly M1E1. Because starting with the letter D indicated a spiritual energy user. Non-spiritual energy users had ranks starting with E. This was not to say non-users could not hold high positions, it was said there were M5 level non-users within Blueprint Group. However, it was exceedingly difficult for a non-user to climb to such a position. Thus, while Li Xin and the woman named Jiao Bingyang seemed separated by only one rank from M1 to M2, in reality they were 10 levels apart. In the strictly hierarchical Blueprint Biotechnology Group, rank did not determine everything, but the gap was so vast that Li Xin knew he had better keep his head down and behave. Otherwise, if his gaze angered this woman, nothing might happen, but if she felt offended, Li Xin would be in trouble. Li Xin hated nothing more than trouble. Across the table, Assistant Supervisor Jiao Bingyang had already taken her seat opposite Li Xin. She was accustomed to the gaze Li Xin had just cast her way. She was well aware of her own beauty. Seeing that Li Xin now dared only to stare at the table type, she deemed him a sensible young man. As Jiao Bingyang sat down, a wheeled robot approached from the side. Jiao Bingyang casually picked up a document from above and began reading it. After finishing, she glanced up at Li Xin. "Civilian Li Xin?" Li Xin finally looked up and said, "That's me." Jiao Bingyang met his gaze and then continued, "I've reviewed your file. First, congratulations on awakening your psychic energy." "Thank you very much," Li Xin said with sincere earnestness. Jiao Bingyang produced a device and placed it on the table. "Next comes the testing phase. Extend your hand and place it into the device. It will measure your psychic energy." Li Xin obediently followed the woman's instructions. As he inserted his hand into the device, he felt a jolt of electricity course through his body. After a few seconds, he heard the device emit a beep. After the device sounded, Jiao Bingyang activated its projection and carefully examined the report. After a moment, she smiled at Li Xin. "Congratulations, Li Xin. You're in luck. Your psychic energy attributes are healthy, reaching the D2 level, and your overall psychic energy state is highly active." "What does a highly active state mean?" Li Xin inquired softly. Jiao Bingyang explained, "Active means your psychic energy will advance at a faster pace, allowing you to adapt to more tasks. Your future development looks promising." Hearing her words, a surge of joy filled Li Xin's heart. After organizing the device, Jiao Bingyang's expression turned serious as she continued, "From this moment on, you are no longer an ordinary civilian. Your status will be automatically changed to a civilian psychic. You must abide by the corporation's psychic laws. Study this document carefully when you return. If you have a chip, you can apply to download it from 9527. A thick reference book materialized on the wheeled robot beside Jiao Bingyang. Li Xin glanced at it and felt a pang of dread. If this book contained all the regulations for psychics, reading it would be an arduous task. "I've reviewed the details of your psychic energy stimulation. Using the lowest grade psychic stimulation compound to successfully awaken your energy was fortunate, but you must also bear the side effects of that compound." Jiao Bingyang spoke slowly. "What's the problem?" Li Xin pressed. "You nearly underwent distortion during the stimulation, didn't you? Although the distortion has subsided now, that doesn't mean it's gone forever. Throughout your life you will have to struggle against distortion. That is the destiny of a psychic. If in your daily life or during the cultivation of your psychic energy you encounter the erosion of chaos, the distortion will re-emerge." Jiao Bingyang gave a brief explanation. "Is there no way to completely eradicate the distortion?" Li Xin asked, unwilling to accept it. Jiao Bingyang shook her head. Li Xin asked again, "If I had used a higher grade or even the highest grade psychic stimulation compound, could I avoid future distortion?" Jiao Bingyang couldn't help but laugh after hearing this. She chuckled. "How did you come up with that idea?" The erosion of chaos does not change based on the grade of the compound used. All psychics face this issue. Distortion is a latent crisis that accompanies every psychic throughout their life. However, we have biointelligent chips that can monitor the body's contamination levels in real time and address problems as they arise. Li Xin nodded silently after hearing this, thinking to himself, biointelligent chip. It wasn't a term he had heard for the first time today. Long ago he had learned of it from Bai Mu. Bai Mu had once mentioned that after his brother awakened his psychic energy, he was implanted with a biointelligent chip which greatly enhanced both his studies and work. I've looked at your file. It seems your family cannot provide the funds to support your implantation of a biointelligent chip. Jiao Bingyang inquired. An ordinary young man might feel embarrassed being asked such a question by a woman of goddess-like beauty. But Li Xin, having lived 2 lives, found it a trivial matter. He said frankly, "That's right, I don't have the money. The Psychic Center has recently introduced a low-interest loan for newly awakened psychics to purchase biointelligent chips." Interested? Jiao Bingyan, seeing Li Xin's candor, regarded him with a bit more respect. A loan? Li Xin was taken aback. He was familiar with the concept in his past life. By the time he heard about opportunities to exploit loopholes, the chance had already passed. He had a friend who exploited dozens of loopholes and got away with it, which had always made him envious. That's right, a loan specifically for purchasing a biointelligent chip. Jiao Bingyang nodded with a smile. You might not understand how powerful this chip is. Simply put, even the most basic biointelligent chip outperforms the military-grade computer mainframes you used during training. Li Xin gasped in astonishment. Were military computer mainframes powerful? Of course they were, not just in performance but also in their rugged durability. Most crucially, on the colonial planet of Guangzhou or Fud, such mainframes existed only in official institutions. Regardless of wealth, non-official entities were forbidden from using them. So would you like one? Jiao Bingyang smiled like a seductive enchantress luring her prey. Li Xin had signed a labor contract to go to the war zone. Whether he would return alive was uncertain. The issue of the loan seemed trivial in comparison. Nevertheless, he asked a crucial question: if I become unable to repay the loan, will my guardian be held responsible? Jiao Bingyang shook her head. This is a special loan for biointelligent chips. It has no other uses, nor will it be passed on to others for repayment. Hearing this, Li Xin didn't hesitate for a moment. Sign me up. Which loan offers the most money? I'll take that one. You seem to be a very decisive person. Jiao Bingyang chuckled softly, then gestured for 9527 to display a projection. Before Li Xin, 2 projections appeared showcasing 2 different biointelligent chips. D2 biointelligent chip military, D2 biointelligent chip research. Li Xin carefully read the details of both chips and the loan amount required. He had initially assumed the military chip would be more expensive, but surprisingly the research chip carried a higher price. The military chip cost 540 energy credits while the research chip cost 650 energy credits. Energy credits were a currency Li Xin had only heard of but never used. It was accessible only after joining a corporation. 1 energy credit represented 1 unit of tangible energy holding considerable value. Wait. You've signed a company employment contract. While Li Xin was engrossed in reading, Jiao Bingyang let out a soft exclamation. At her words, an inexplicable panic seized Li Xin's heart. The labor contract for the war zone had been discovered. Would the loan still proceed? Would anyone truly be willing to lend money to someone who might die at any moment? Li Xin looked at Jiao Bingyang with anxiety. Jiao Bingyang smiled gently. Having this corporate employment contract raises your credit rating, which means your loan limit will increase. How about it? Interested in upgrading to a better biointelligent chip? Jiao Bingyan's voice sounded almost syrupy sweet to Li Xin's ears at that moment. Upgrade to a better one. I must have it. A wise choice, Jiao Bingyang said with a sweet smile. Then she snapped her fingers and the airborne 9527 retracted its previous projection, replacing it with 2 new ones. D for biointelligent chip military, D for biointelligent chip research. The chip's tier remained unchanged, but its grade had been elevated by 2 levels. Li Xin examined the chip's attributes. This upgrade compared to the D2 improved overall performance by approximately 18. Naturally, the enhancement wasn't limited to performance alone, the price had also risen. With merely an 18 performance boost, the price of the military chip soared to 940 energy coins, while the research chip reached 1050 energy coins. With the specifications of these 2 biointelligent chips laid before him, Li Xin made his decision almost instantly. Yet he still read through the details of both chips thoroughly. Although he could comprehend most of the attribute terms, he lacked a deep understanding of them. He was about to head to the war zone and join a defense company, so his only viable choice was the military chip. Military and research were two entirely different paths, otherwise Li Xin would have opted for the more expensive one. After all, cheap isn't always good, but quality always comes at a price. Li Xin glanced at the loan repayment interest rate below, an annual rate of 24. What a compliant interest rate. The figure made Li Xin's vision blur, but he had no other option. Pointing at the military chip, he said, "I choose this one. How do I proceed?" Jiao Bingyin's expression remained sweet as she replied, "Good eye. Given where you're headed, the military chip is your wisest choice. Next, carefully read the loan agreement. Once you sign it, we can proceed with implanting the biointelligent chip." Hearing her words, Li Xin's heart jolted, but he soon composed himself and faced the situation calmly. He read the loan agreement diligently, though it felt futile. The document contained thousands of clauses, many of which were strikingly similar. Li Xin felt as though he had prematurely entered a state of diamond confusion. After a cursory review, he found no issues and said to 9527 to sign it. Now in the psionic center, he no longer needed to sign with a pen, he only had to align his pupils with 9527's new signal light. Once the loan agreement was signed, Jiao Bingyin's voice rang out, "Congratulations, Li Xin. Your loan has been approved and disbursed. You are now qualified to purchase a military intelligent chip." Hearing her declaration, Li Xin couldn't suppress his curiosity and asked, "You know I'm going to the war zone assigned to Hengan security?" Jiao Bingyang nodded. "Yes. Your clearance level is low, so I can access nearly all your information. Then why are you willing to grant me the loan? I mean, aren't you afraid he'll die out there? Or do you think him relatively safe?" Li Xin inquired. Jiao Bingyang replied nonchalantly, "According to data analysis, there's a 25 probability you'll die within the first 2 weeks of entering the war zone and a 44 chance you'll perish within the first month." "What? How can my mortality rate be so high?" This time it was Li Xin's turn to lose confidence, and he nearly cried out in shock. "Of course, it's just data analysis," Jiao Bingyang said softly. Just as Li Xin began to breathe a sigh of relief, she added, "You might die even sooner." Li Xin stared at her dumbfounded, then asked, "Then why would you still grant me the loan?" "Why not?" Jiao Bingyang tilted her head slightly, looking at him with puzzlement. "If I die, wouldn't that debt go bad?" Li Xin frowned. "Yes, it would go bad. But what's the problem with that?" Jiao Bingyang nodded. "Although I applied for the loan, the money isn't mine, it belongs to the corporation. It's the corporation's ledger that takes the hit." As she spoke, her eyes narrowed into a smile. Li Xin was left speechless, then couldn't help but exclaim, "Well said. Truly well said." Jiao Bingyang waved her hand. "All right, let's not waste any more time. My work here is done. Now follow 9527 to get the chip implanted." Without waiting for Li Xin to respond, she stood up, swayed her figure, and walked out through a side alloy door. In the room, 9527 signal light flickered. "Civilian, please follow me." Li Xin stared wistfully in the direction Jiao Bingyang had left, then glanced at the airborne 9527. "Who would want to follow this robot? I want the beauty." Despite his thoughts, Li Xin obediently trailed after the machine. Entering the elevator again, their destination this time was the 65th floor. Stepping out behind 9527, Li Xin caught the pungent scent of disinfectant in the air. Clearly this floor was likely dedicated to surgical procedures. Following 9527's guiding dotted lines, Li Xin eventually arrived at an operating room. He hadn't truly entered the operating theater yet, instead he seemed to be in a sterilization chamber. Ahead, separated by a large pane of glass, lay the actual operating room, which was filled with numerous instruments Li Xin couldn't recognize. "Civilian, please wait here. Medical personnel will arrive in 5 minutes. Wishing you a successful surgery." After saying this, 9527 ascended to the ceiling and hovered there. Li Xin could only stand obediently before the operating table. Fortunately, this wait wasn't too long. Soon the side alloy door slid open automatically and a team of medical staff in blue sterilized suits entered the operating room. Li Xin observed the group of 5, 3 men and 2 women. The men appeared to be doctors while the women were nurses. One of the nurses approached him and said, "Civilian, please cooperate with me." Following that, Li Xin was like a marionette, thoroughly disinfected and changed into surgical attire under the nurse's direction. Once he lay on the bed and was fully anesthetized, the surgery began. But Li Xin was unable to witness this scene. The doctor skillfully made an incision on his forehead and implanted a biointelligent chip the size of a fingernail into his brain. The surgery was lengthy, taking about an hour. When it was complete, the doctor pulled over an instrument to suture the wound on Li Xin's forehead. Then with a spray and a flash of laser light, Li Xin's forehead was restored to its original state, leaving no trace that surgery had ever been performed. Li Xin slept a profoundly restful slumber. He opened his eyes and stretched, feeling that this was the most rejuvenating sleep he had experienced in years. When he fully awoke and surveyed his surroundings, a jolt of alarm struck him. Only then did he recall where he was. From this moment onward he had bid farewell to his ordinary past. He had signed the employment contract with Blueprint, awakened his spiritual energy, implanted a biointelligent chip, and taken out a substantial loan. Each day upon waking he would now face the burden of a massive debt. The tranquil life he once knew had for Li Xin completely faded into the distance. He climbed out of bed and the robot 9527 flew before him. Civilian, congratulations. Your D for biointelligent chip has been successfully implanted. Please silently recite in your mind, activate chip. Experience your intelligent life. Li Xin nodded at 9527, though he was unsure why he felt compelled to nod at a machine. Li Xin closed his eyes and, following the robot's instructions, began to recite in his mind, activate chip. Ding. D for biointelligent chip military version activated successfully. Thank you for supporting Blueprint Biotechnology. Next I will guide you into the intelligent world. With the voice echoing in his mind, the chip was officially activated. The chip requires 13 authorizations from you. Yes, no. Here it was a familiar sensation. Li Xin felt as if he were installing some new app in his past life. He opened the authorization options, read them carefully, and then granted all permissions. Please give your chip a suitable name. Li Xin pondered and silently uttered 0. All right, 0 is at your service. Would you like to begin the tutorial? Begin. Following the chip's step-by-step guidance, Li Xin gained a preliminary understanding of its functions. As for the rest, he would have to learn and adapt in his daily life and work ahead. Li Xin summarized his understanding of 0 into the following points. 1. Language and translation capability, enabling real-time translation of all languages in the database. 2. Enhanced memory and learning. The chip can download basic and advanced knowledge from the database, helping the host master it more quickly. 3. Cognitive assistance and decision support, provides real-time information analysis, logical reasoning, and strategic suggestions in complex tasks. 4. Security and privacy protection, monitors chaotic erosion levels in real time, preventing unauthorized access and malicious data tampering. 5. Instant communication and information sharing, enables seamless communication between soldiers and command centers, ensuring real-time battlefield information transmission and sharing. 6. Skill enhancement and training, provides skill training, knowledge updates, and tactical drills for soldiers based on combat needs. 7. Multi-platform weapon interconnectivity, can interface with intelligent firearms and various combat vehicles, enabling faster operations. This was merely the information Li Xin had gleaned from a brief glance at the tutorial. Compared to the chip's full potential, his understanding was still far from thorough. Yet even this was enough to make Li Xin feel it was incredibly impressive. He opened his eyes, knowing that most functions would have to be experienced gradually in the days to come. The robot 9527 flew to his side and said, "Civilian, congratulations. Your biointelligent chip is detected as activated. Do you authorize connection to the Spiritual Energy Center data network?" A pillow appeared just as drowsiness struck. Though the chip was excellent, 0 was in its initial activation state, its functions were described but specific features remained unusable. Because the chip was not yet connected to the network, it couldn't download the necessary software and programs. Authorize, hurry and authorize. Li Xin was eager to join the network. He wondered how he had managed to endure so many years without a phone. Network connection successful. With the chip's prompt, a series of programs began downloading. Please follow me to the rest area. 9527 led the way. Soon Li Xin arrived at the rest area on the 5th floor. There he saw several others dressed similarly to himself. Evidently these were also individuals who had just awakened their spiritual energy. Li Xin closed his eyes, using his newly acquired spiritual energy to perceive the chip in his mind. Soon as his spiritual energy scanned the chip, he gained a slightly deeper understanding of it. Unlike computer chips, this biointelligent chip relied on the body's own bioelectricity and spiritual energy. Moreover, the chip had a fairly high demand for spiritual energy. 0. Calculate how long my spiritual energy can sustain the chip's operation. Receiving command. Calculation complete. Your spiritual energy can support the chip's operation for 2 hours and 36 minutes. Once depleted, the chip will enter ultra energy saving mode, retaining only basic functions. Li Xin sighed softly. The chip was excellent in every way, but its operational time was far too short. He then used his newly mastered spiritual energy to examine his own body. He wanted to see what had caused his past aberration. Upon inspection, he was startled to discover beside the 0 chip an almost identical chip was coalescing. This chip felt incredibly familiar to Li Xin, as though it were formed from his own spiritual energy. Under his spiritual gaze, the chip gradually took shape. Spiritual energy chip implanted successfully. Chip auto-replicating. D for spiritual energy chip activated successfully. A cascade of prompts flashed through Li Xin's mind. This sudden turn of events stunned him. 0. What is a spiritual energy chip? Li Xin couldn't help but ask. Querying database. No target found. Li Xin's heart sank. If even 0 couldn't find it, there were only two possibilities. Either the database truly lacked information on this spiritual energy chip or 0's permissions were insufficient. Neither option was good news. He had only bought one chip. How had he ended up with a bio-negitona-free deal? No one had mentioned this could happen. While Li Xin was still in a daze, the newly appeared spiritual energy chip had already merged with the original 0 chip. After a burst of static, the two chips temporarily separated. D for bio-intelligent chip has been analyzed. 0 is at your service. 0 is still 0, but it is no longer the 0 of the past. From this moment on, Li Xin's mind contains two chips. One is the biological intelligence chip from Blueprint Company and the other is his spiritual energy chip. Moreover, it seems that the biological intelligence chip has yet to surpass the capabilities of the spiritual energy chip. 0 has been infiltrated and assimilated by the spiritual energy 0. It's a complicated situation, but the facts have changed. Li Xin's expression is complex. This might be good news, at least for now. The biological intelligence chip, regardless of circumstances, is a creation of the Blueprint Biological Technology Group. Once implanted in the brain, it means that Li Xin's mind is not only his own but also that of the Blueprint Biological Technology Group. Now, with the chip born from Li Xin's own spiritual energy having gained control over the biological intelligence chip, it has alleviated one of Li Xin's hidden dangers. And it's not just that. Li Xin's mind now contains two chips. Isn't this double the joy? The original network authorization of 0 has been directly acquired by the spiritual energy chip. Currently, both chips are utilizing the network of the spiritual energy center to rapidly download various knowledge to enrich their capabilities. This is exhilarating. For Li Xin, the potential issues with the spiritual energy chip in the future are no longer important. The key point is that it works well now. The only pity is that this spiritual energy chip can only replicate and cannot innovate on its own. Why replicate a D4 level chip? If it could automatically upgrade to a higher level like CB or even a level chips, that would be truly impressive. But from another perspective, having two chips is much better than one. Whether it's download speed, work threads, or even the computing power it can provide in the future, it's double the capacity. Li Xin is delighted. Is this his long-awaited golden finger arriving late? The golden finger is here. However happy as he is, Li Xin also begins to seriously utilize the chip to learn more knowledge. First, it's about pollution levels. This is one of the important functions of the chip. After all, it has been specifically categorized as a major item. Moreover, both his own performance during the activation of spiritual energy and what Jiao Bingyang mentioned earlier highlight the significance of distortion and pollution levels. At this moment, Li Xin is reading and studying materials regarding pollution levels. Chaos and Pollution Level Report. This is the only document Li Xin can access that fits within his authority. From this document, he has entered a world he could not understand before and gained a deeper insight into the world he has lived in for over a decade. Spiritual energy users are the darlings of human civilization, at least during the era of interstellar expansion. However, with the emergence of the subspace, spiritual energy users encountered the most terrifying threats. The universe has since been divided into two realms. One is the physical universe where Li Xin resides, filled with dazzling stars. The other is the dark side of the universe, the subspace, a chaotic world. In the subspace, countless chaotic beings exist, among which the most powerful are the four chaotic evil gods. However, Li Xin cannot access information about the chaotic evil gods due to insufficient clearance. Thus, this part of the information is skipped. Moving on to the next section. All spiritual energy users after the emergence of the subspace face the possibility of being eroded by chaos. This point erupted during the era of interstellar expansion, where countless spiritual energy users were influenced by chaos, ultimately falling into chaos as chaotic spiritual energy users or even chaotic demons. As a result, the entire universe entered a dark age where slaughter and destruction became the main themes of this era. Over time, humanity gradually found ways to combat the erosion from subspace. This allowed human civilization to continue to exist. The biological intelligence chip is a product of this era, implanted in the brain and connected to spiritual energy. When the host exhibits excessively high pollution levels, indicating a trend toward complete corruption into chaos, it will alert the host to take preventive measures in advance. Li Xin, seeing this, uses the newly downloaded program to check his chaotic pollution level. Chaotic pollution level 32. This is a relatively high pollution figure. Once it reaches 50, or the body will show signs of distortion, and at 75 the degree of distortion will continue to increase until reaching 100 pollution, leading to fall into chaos. After glancing at the pollution level, Lishan strives to calm his emotions and inquires, Zero, I just activated my spiritual energy. How can the pollution level be so high? Self-check in progress. Zero's voice echoed in Lishan's mind. Detection result: the reason for the high pollution level is that the host used D1 level spiritual energy to stimulate the No.7 compound, resulting in excessive spiritual energy impurities. Solution: maintain a cheerful mood, read positive books and knowledge. The impurities in the host's body will begin to be expelled within 72 hours and will be completely eliminated after 712 hours. Hearing Zero's analysis, Lishan felt a bit relieved. The impurities can actually be expelled. He couldn't help but ask, how will they be expelled? Through excretion, Zero replied. Lishan shook his head slightly, having thought it would be something like what he read in novels of the past life, some form of detoxification that would involve expelling black sludge from all over. However, upon further reflection, this makes sense. After all, the human body's strongest detoxification ability is through vomiting, urination and defecation. Now Lishan's capacity for acceptance is quite high. If it's excretion, that's fine, much better than if it were to come out of his mouth. Finally, after sitting still for half a day, Lishan completed the download of all the knowledge and programs he needed. Fortunately, this download took place at the Spiritual Energy Center, so there was no need to expend additional spiritual energy for network usage. Otherwise, Lishan's little amount of spiritual energy would probably be depleted within an hour. Moreover, how much can actually be downloaded remains uncertain. Once the download was completely finished, Lishan had no more reason to stay here. He followed 9,527 downstairs and finally left the Spiritual Energy Center building. Standing outside the building looking at the starlight at the horizon, the sky had gradually darkened. Lishan shielded his eyes with his hand, gazing at the stars. The rotation period of the fourth conglomerates is 25 hours, and it was already close to dark. This activation of spiritual energy took almost 3 days, with most of the time spent in a coma after activating the energy and during the procedure. Lishan turned back to look at the towering building, letting out a sigh of relief. Regardless of what fate awaits him next, he is still happy. Becoming a spiritual energy user may change his future. As night fell, Lishan returned to the front of the repair shop. The lights were still on inside, illuminating the silhouettes of 2 figures, Li Duong and a woman. From a distance, the woman bore the unmistakable marks of the slums: dark skin, hair cropped short like stubble, and an unremarkable figure. She appeared to be in her 30s, an ordinary woman. A smile graced her face, and Li Duong wore a similar expression, as if both were brimming with hope for the future. Li Duong was well into his 40s and legless, relying on a pair of mechanical prosthetics. In his past life, finding a partner would have been a considerable challenge. But this was Guangzhou, for a colonial planet. In these slums, owning a shop and mastering a trade everyone needed meant a stable future. It seemed Li Duong's quest for a wife had concluded successfully. Lishan, witnessing this from the shadows, turned and walked away with a smile. He chose not to return to the shop. Though Li Duong would surely be overjoyed to see him alive, Lishan knew that this reunion would only lead to another farewell. And the place Lishan was headed was anything but safe. It was a war zone. According to Jiao Bingyan's data analysis, Lishan had at least a 50% chance of dying within the first month. As for the second month, she hadn't mentioned it, but the odds were likely grim. Though Lishan had become a psychic, the death of a psychic on this planet was hardly a significant event. It was better not to return than to make Li Duong worry all over again. After Lishan left, Li Duong seemed to sense something. He walked with heavy steps to the rolling shutter door, squinting toward the spot where Lishan had stood. But the spot was now empty. Lishan had long since departed. "What are you looking at?" a woman's voice came from behind. Li Duong squinted, seeing nothing, and slowly reached out to pull down the rolling shutter. Amidst the clattering noise, his voice rang out, "Nothing. Let's close up early today." Lishan did not go home. Instead, he found a cheap inn to stay in. He had nothing of importance at home and carried little money. But soon he would join the Blueprint Biotechnology Group, and everything he needed would be provided. Staying outside for a few days was still within his means. After settling into the inn, Lishan lay on the bed, sensing his psychic energy. Psychic energy was a peculiar thing, and mastering it was not always a blessing. At the very least, mastering psychic energy greatly increased the chance of corruption by chaos. A faint arc of electricity flickered in Lishan's hand, one of the manifestations of his power. Unlike the violent surge of electricity that had swept through the room when he first awakened, this arc was far less lethal. If it struck an ordinary person, it would feel like a jolt from a stun baton. And its maximum range was merely a few meters. Of course, this was likely due to Lishan's low psychic rank. After experimenting for a while, he stopped using his power and waited for it to recover naturally. A newly awakened psychic practicing in an empty room was far too dangerous. Psychic energy born in the warp was fraught with peril from the moment of its emergence. When a psychic used their power, they weren't just drawing from within themselves, they were opening a faucet to the warp, channeling its energy. In this process, the psychic soul blazed like a torch in the darkness of the warp. A torch in the night attracts moths. And a soul like a torch in the warp would attract other moths, the terrifying chaos diamonds. For a psychic targeted by them, there were only two outcomes. Repel the demon or be killed by it, have one's soul devoured and one's body possessed. Thus, even though psychics were immensely powerful and could achieve much, casting psychic spells, manipulating life energy, altering cellular structures, healing allies, or slaying enemies, every psychic deliberately avoided overusing their power. Each use was a gamble with their soul. Gamble and eventually you will lose. Therefore, the best course was to watch others gamble while staying out of the game yourself. Methods for training psychic power had been downloaded into Li Xin's chip. But all of them shared one requirement: training must be conducted in officially constructed meditation chambers. This offered maximum protection for the psychic soul. Training outside such chambers, if caught, came with severe penalties. As a newly awakened psychic, Li Xin had no desire to discover just how severe those penalties were. Unable to train, he could only rely on sleep to restore his psychic energy. At that moment, he longed for the deep sleep induced by anesthesia. But with the chip, it wasn't so bad. Li Xin commanded the chip activate sleep assistance mode. Zero's command received. Sleep assistance mode activated. In just 2 minutes, Li Xin, who normally took at least 10 to fall asleep, drifted into slumber. A biointelligent chip. Absolutely fantastic. Time passed quickly, and soon it was the day Li Xin was to report for duty. All the information and documents for his employment had been downloaded into the chip. Guided by Zero, he navigated through the city streets to his destination. Before a towering city building. Only in the inner ring at the city's heart could Li Xin feel the advancement of technological civilization. In the slums, his perception of technology was fragmented. He could see both high-end tech and people struggling to survive, much like in his past life. But Li Xin had no time for sentiment. He looked at the sign on the building and knew this was the Defense Department of the Blueprint Biotechnology Group. This was where he needed to report. The area was bustling with people, most dressed in the standard corporate attire, the Blueprint Biotechnology uniform. Some wore powered armor, especially the security personnel on both sides. Against such armor, even firearms and electromagnetic rifles would be little more than a tickle. Li Xin entered the building, registered at the front desk, and followed a similar intelligent robot upstairs. As the elevator ascended, he soon arrived at the 28th floor. Upon entering a room, Li Xin sat down to wait. He did not have to wait long. Within just a few minutes, a man and a woman came through the door. Having awakened his psychic power, Li Xin's eyesight had become sharper. With a mere turn of his head, he clearly read the name badges of the two. M1E5 Personnel Specialist Chang Jigua, M2E2 Assistant Personnel Supervisor Su Shanfang. It seemed both were administrative staff from the Defense Department, non-psychics. Li Xin instinctively straightened up. After Su Shanfang and Chang Jigua sat down, each held a thin, lightweight computer, more like a supple page of a book than a device. Su Shanfang spoke first, her face bearing a professional smile. Li Xin, is it? Yes, I am Li Xin. Now let us formally begin the onboarding process. Li Xin nodded eagerly. No problem, where do we start? First, fill out these documents. Su Shanfang and Chang Jigua each handed Li Xin a set of forms to complete. Half were paper documents, while the other half needed to be filled in on the lightweight computer. There was a considerable amount to fill out and sign, including numerous clauses. Li Xin silently issued a command to Zero in his mind: help me check if these contracts are compliant. Command received. Thus, with the combined efforts of Li Xin and Zero, the contract clauses were swiftly identified. After confirming there were no issues, he began to formally fill them out. When Li Xin had completed all the documents, Chang Jigua retrieved a large box from the side. He said, please accept this welcome package, which includes 2 sets of company uniforms and a smart wristband. Thank you. Li Xin quickly reached out and took it. Su Shanfang smiled. You should have a biochip, right? First, activate the smart wristband, link it with the chip, and after authorization, this wristband can facilitate various processes within the group. Li Xin followed the instructions, put on a black wristband, and authorized the connection between the chip and the wristband. Once everything was ready, he saw that Su Shanfang and Chang Jigua had also straightened up. Su Shanfang announced, civilian Li Xin. First, congratulations on officially joining the Blueprint Biotech Group family. With that, Su Shanfang and Chang Jigua both extended their hands and gently applauded. Thank you. Joining Blueprint Biotech Group has always been my dream. Li Xin was also very pleased. We have reviewed your signed contract. Upon joining, you will first be an intern for 6 months. Originally, your level was M1E1 Intern Specialist. However, according to the records, you have now awakened your psychic power, so your job level will be officially raised to M1D3 Intern Specialist. Your salary will be 40 energy units per month. According to the contract M1D3 Intern Specialist Li Xin, you will be dispatched to Hengan Security Company within 7 working days of joining. These are your basic onboarding details. If you have any objections, please ask me promptly and I will do my best to coordinate and apply on your behalf. After Su Shanfang finished reading, she looked at Li Xin with a smile once more. After hearing all the information, Li Xin pondered and asked, "Can I request a transfer?" Li Xin was not particularly concerned about the job level or salary. Only the dispatch to Hengan Security troubled him. Whether it worked or not, asking couldn't hurt. After hearing Li Xin's question, Su Shanfang's smile remained unchanged. She even nodded in agreement and said, "Actually, if possible, I would also suggest you transfer. Being a new recruit sent directly to a war zone is far too dangerous." "Shall I apply for a transfer for you?" Li Xin asked incredulously. "Really?" Su Shanfang smiled and nodded, "Of course. But I must warn you, the application approval and final processing of a transfer all take time." "How much time?" A flicker of unease crossed Li Xin's mind. Employee transfers and reassignments require approval from an M4 level senior personnel manager. "I will submit your transfer application within 14 working days. My M3 level supervisor will review and forward it within 7 to 30 working days. Finally, the M4 senior personnel manager will approve the document within 14 to 60 working days after receipt. If the transfer is approved, you will soon be able to work in a new department." After hearing this entire process, Li Xin felt a sense of dread. A single rotation of the planet Caos Borealis took 25 hours, and the term working day was based on the revolution of Blue Star, the cradle of human civilization. Each working day was 25 hours, with 8 hours of work and 17 hours of rest. According to Su Shanfang's timeline, even if the approval went through, it could be 2 or 3 months later. If Li Xin was unlucky, after 2 or 3 months at Hengan Security, his bones might be used for drumming. Though inwardly cursing the lazy bureaucracy, Li Xin's expression remained unchanged. He smiled and said, "After careful thought, being dispatched to Hengan Security is actually a great opportunity. I am a brick, wherever the group needs me I go. I've decided not to transfer. I'll go to Hengan Security." "What a pity. I had already started drafting the transfer application for you." Su Shanfang looked at Li Xin with regret. "I'm sorry for the trouble, but I've decided not to transfer. I won't put you through the process anymore," Li Xin said sincerely. "Not transferring is also a wise choice." Su Shanfang nodded. "Your workplace is at Hengan Security. I personally suggest you report to your post as soon as possible. What do you think?" Li Xin clenched his fist under the table, but thinking he had to bow to circumstance, said, "Your suggestion is very reasonable. I am also eager to serve the group." Su Shanfang's smile widened and she said, "I believe you will be a good employee." On the day of his induction, Li Xin had already completed the transformation from a civilian to a corporate employee. Moreover, he was an intern at the M1D3 level, essentially being promoted 2 ranks upon entry. Had this been a stable position, Li Xin would have been too thrilled to sleep that very night. Unfortunately, being assigned to Hengan Defense right after joining was truly unfortunate. At this moment, Li Xin was already inside a military base. Following the guidance of his chip, he arrived at the boarding entrance of a transport craft. Li Xin's attire was now different. He wore the uniform of the Defense Department, a set of black garments. The uniform was crisp with white lines outlining its edges. Worn on Li Xin, it instantly made his already upright stature appear even more valiant. Donning his employee badge, Li Xin boarded the transport craft. After a scan by the chip, this transport was identified as a Pelican-class transport craft. Its full name was the Big Belly Bird, Pelican-class transport craft. Upon seeing this name, even Li Xin couldn't help but admire the naming genius. After entering the transport, Li Xin found his seat as directed by the staff. It was not an individual seat, but the seating was relatively spacious. Li Xin surveyed his surroundings, noting rows of similar seats. Before long, more and more people boarded the transport, similar to Li Xin yet somewhat different. These were soldiers, likely seasoned veterans. They wore standard urban camouflage uniforms and carried large military backpacks that seemed nearly full, clearly containing their equipment. These soldiers also belonged to Blueprint Biotechnology, but under the Defense Department. Their official rank within the group was M1F0. Strictly speaking, they were not formal employees of Blueprint, as even ordinary interns held the rank of M1E1. These men were soldiers, consumables and non-promotable ones at that. Their rank could only advance within the F sequence. They could not become officers unless they underwent intensive training at a military academy. Under normal circumstances, if Li Xin wished to join Blueprint, his most likely path would be to enter the Defense Department. But this department was already overcrowded. He might have to bear the F rank for many years before truly becoming a corporate employee. Even though he had undergone 8 years of basic military training since adolescence, it was the same. His normal entry would also be at the F level, at most equivalent to a non-commissioned officer, not an officer. About 200 soldiers gradually boarded this Pelican transport, after which the flow of people subsided. However, the transport had not yet taken off and was still bustling with activity. Beneath the seats of Li Xin and the others was a cargo space currently being loaded with various supplies, weapons, ammunition, and even vehicles. The Pelican transport had considerable capacity, able to carry at least a battalion of over 300 soldiers along with their equipment. Li Xin speculated that the space below was now loading the weapons and gear of the soldiers around him, possibly including some weapon supplies for Hengan defense. For now, none of this had much to do with Li Xin. Apart from the uniform on his back, he had nothing. The soldiers beside him were armed to the teeth with standard rifles and pistols. He, on the other hand, was virtually unarmed. Although his rank was higher than the soldiers beside him, as a newly promoted half-baked scion, if a fight broke out he would likely be thoroughly trounced by them. The rifles in the soldiers' hands were standard electromagnetic rifles, the V-12 electromagnetic rifle, using metal projectiles accelerated through electromagnetic rails within the weapon. These rifles delivered several times the power of conventional gunpowder arms. When Li Xin was still a military trainee, he had used such weapons and had a solid understanding of their power. The soldiers also wore simple armor. Based on Li Xin's knowledge and chip identification, the armor was likely the Red Seal Individual 2 armor. This was a type of individual semi-protective armor. Though called semi-protective, it covered the main parts of the made from a grade military composite alloy. The torso was fully protected and the thighs had leg guards of the same material. Only at the joints and arms where flexibility was needed was lightweight protection made from composite fabric used. This set of armor was impervious to gunpowder firearms, though heavy weapons like autocannons were beyond its defense range. Due to its strength and comfort, even the V-12 electromagnetic rifle required sustained hits to penetrate the armor. Of course, being hit by an electromagnetic rifle even without penetration was no easy matter for the soldier. The immense kinetic energy could knock them flying, and even with the armor's cushioning, broken bones were common. Looking at these soldiers armed to the teeth, Li Xin's heart tightened. The cost of their gear was far from cheap, certainly more expensive than the soldiers themselves. Judging by their appearance, they, like Li Xin, were part of the cannon fodder forces supporting Hengan defense. Yes, cannon fodder. On the colonial planet Guansuo, for even wearing individual armor, these infantrymen were still cannon fodder. Though the frontline battle due to the subspace storm in space would not see orbital starship attacks. However, heavy vehicles between the two armies were never lacking: various heavy artillery, multipurpose armored vehicles, tanks, fighters, and even mechs. In the face of these mechanical creations, the role of infantry was greatly diminished, but the price paid in lives was vastly increased. War is only easy to watch. If one truly joined the war, it would never be a pleasant affair. Of course, if one held a high position in the rear command center, then that was a different story. They only reaped the benefits if the front won. They took the lion's share of the credit. If they lost, even if all the infantry died, the commanders in the rear faced no danger and could continue to conscript soldiers for battle. With the roar of the Pelican transport's engines, this massive mechanical creation lifted off and headed into the distance. After a brief period of pressure, the transport entered a state of stable flight. Attention all units, this is the captain of the transport. The big belly bird has taken off. We will spend a wonderful 13 hours and 25 minutes together in the air. Now, let's get hyped, all right. Amidst the resounding heavy metal music echoing inside the transport ship, Li Xin and his companions finally arrived at their destination after nearly 13.5 hours of airborne travel. Time flies so fast. Before we knew it, we have spent a delightful 13.5 hours together. We have arrived at the Hengan Defense Military Base No. 3. Please exit the Dadu Neo transport ship in an orderly manner. If possible, I hope everyone can continue to ride with my Dadu Neo next time. As the captain of the Dadu Neo rambled on, Li Xin had already descended the stairs on one side. Meanwhile, the soldiers inside the transport ship had begun to line up below. While they were on the transport ship, there had been loud boastful chatter, and they even cursed the captain of the Dadu Neo for the poor music. However, after arriving at this military base, everyone fell silent, behaving quite obediently. The soldiers were laden with bags and waited in line. Li Xin, on the other hand, had nothing with him, not even personal items, as he hadn't even returned to the repair shop. He was unsure of where to go, so he stood alone beside the soldiers. Boom! With a roar of engines, two multifunctional off-road vehicles drove up in front of everyone. Accompanied by the screeching of brakes and thick black smoke, the vehicles came to a halt. Li Xin looked up and saw that a total of 5 people were aboard the two vehicles. The 2 drivers were dressed like ordinary soldiers, while the other 3 appeared more like officers. After the 3 got out, 2 of the officers approached the soldiers to begin receiving them and replenishing their equipment. The other officer came directly to Li Xin. Li Xin hurriedly stood at attention, awaiting the arrival of this officer who might be his superior. The officer stood before Li Xin looking to be around 30 years old. From him Li Xin could distinctly sense the aura of spiritual energy. M1D3 intern Li Xin. The officer spoke, though it was a question. His tone was certain. "Sir, I am Li Xin. I know you are a group employee, but this is a combat zone, so you better keep your ID badge hidden." The officer frowned as he spoke. "Yes, sir." Li Xin replied loudly, quickly removing his badge and stuffing it into his jacket pocket. "I am the M2 staff officer of the base Gao Liang. From today onward you will join the Blueprint Dispatch Army." "Yes, sir." Gao Liang turned and led Li Xin onto the vehicle. After greeting the two accompanying officers, he took Li Xin away. After a few minutes of driving, the vehicle stopped in front of a 4-5-story building. Gao Liang marched into the building, and along the way Li Xin noticed that Gao Liang seemed to be in a bad mood and did not dare to speak. Along the way several uniformed personnel saluted Gao Liang, and many also paid attention to Li Xin, who followed behind Gao Liang. Without exchanging words, Li Xin followed Gao Liang into an office. The office was relatively simply decorated with matte-colored alloy walls and no peculiar ornaments. Gao Liang saluted a man in military uniform in his 30s inside the office and said, "Supervisor, the person has been brought." The officer nodded and said, "All right, you can leave now." "Yes." Afterward only Li Xin and the officer behind the desk remained in the office. After a moment of waiting, the officer looked up and said, "Li Xin. I am the M3 Defense Supervisor of the Dispatch Army, Lu Quan." "Hello, sir." Li Xin hurriedly saluted and shouted loudly. Lu Quan sat behind the desk and took out a document. With just a glance, Li Xin guessed that it must be his own file. After looking at it for a short while, Lu Quan put the document down and looked at Li Xin, saying, "I have already reviewed your file. You are quite the lucky one to be a substitute. How do you feel about joining the group and being dispatched to a dangerous combat zone right after?" "Report, sir." "I have no particular feelings. Being able to join the group is my fortune, and even though this is a combat zone, I will work diligently." Lu Quan nodded and said, "It's best that you think this way. I reviewed your file. You have been a military trainee for 8 years, mainly studying basic infantry and armored unit command, correct?" "Yes." Lu Quan looked at Li Xin for a few seconds, contemplating before saying, 8 years as a military trainee, but you have never formally entered the army. Now in the Hengan Defense Base's dispatch army, the soldiers here are all veterans. It might be challenging for a rookie like you to gain their respect. You are fortunate. I currently need personnel under my command, so I will give you 2 choices." Li Xin remained silent, quietly waiting for Lu Quan to continue speaking. Lu Quan said, "The first choice is based on your specialty. I will arrange for you to join the 2nd Infantry Battalion, temporarily serving as a company commander or within the armored troops as a platoon commander. The second choice, since you are a spiritual energy user, you can join the mech support unit, piloting a D-class mech and becoming a D-class mech support specialist." Upon hearing Lu Quan's words, Li Xin's heart raced, almost doubling in speed in an instant. Li Xin had been a military trainee for 8 years, learning infantry tactics and armored tactics, so he certainly had a deep understanding of these 2 types of troops. Without that dispatch contract, Li Xin could only become a non-commissioned officer, possibly just an infantry squad leader. Now with a formal contract and having become a spiritual energy user due to the potion, Li Xin finally had the fortune to become an officer. As an infantry platoon commander, he would be able to command 3 infantry combat squads, which is about 30 people. However, in battle, no matter how accurate Li Xin's shooting skills were or how slick his movements were, he would still be a mere cannon fodder. As an armored platoon commander, he could command about 4 armored vehicles, which could be tanks or armored cars. This would be slightly better than being an infantryman, qualifying him as a tougher cannon fodder. In the interstellar era, both offensive spears and defensive shields have made significant advancements. Infantry could be taken down by a single shot from a tank, turning them into fresh meat sauce. Tanks and armored vehicles could also be directly penetrated by individual weapons, turning the crew into burnt piglets. Mechs, fully known as mobile battle armor, and mech specialists are the true good profession. Mechs have high defense, powerful weapons, and most importantly are very stylish. Although in the fierce wars on the front lines, the D-class mechs mentioned by Lu Quan are still considered high-level cannon fodder. However, compared to the first 2 types of troops, the survival rate of piloting a mech is evidently much higher than that of either an infantry commander or an armored commander. If Li Xin were to join the infantry or armored troops, his survival rate in the combat zone would likely be as low as Jiao Bingyang anticipated. But if he becomes a mech pilot, then his survival rate would at least increase by 20 to 30%. Instructor? No. Sir. I want to pilot a mech. Lu Quan nodded and said, "A wise choice. Even if I put you a raw recruit in a commander's position, I'd worry you couldn't handle a platoon of infantry. You're lucky the mech division has suffered heavy losses lately, or you wouldn't have this chance to join. Make the most of it." "Thank you, sir." Li Xin replied loudly. "But I've never learned how to pilot a mech. Will that be a problem?" Li Xin stammered. Of course it's a big problem. But things have been relatively calm these past few days. For a psionic mastering mech piloting isn't as hard as you might imagine. It'll give you time to learn the skills as quickly as possible. Lu Quan said sternly. Of course I hope you learn fast because we won't wait for you to take your time. Once battle breaks out, even if you haven't mastered it, you'll still have to join the fight. Yes, sir. I'll learn to pilot the mech as fast as I can. Li Xin was eager to guarantee his commitment, desperate not to be reassigned. Lu Quan pondered for a moment and said, I'll find you a teacher to get you up to speed. Thank you, sir. Lu Quan tapped his smart bracelet and called out, Summon Li. No, call Jianglu up here. Before long a burly man walked in, appearing to be around 30. Chief, you called for me. The man named Jianglu approached the desk and saluted. I've called you here with some good news. Lu Quan smiled. What good news? Jianglu grinned back. Your combat squad has taken heavy losses. I'm assigning you a replacement today. Lu Quan chuckled. That's great. Is it him? Jianglu turned to Li Xin with delight. Li Xin quickly offered a friendly smile. He nodded repeatedly. Without a doubt, this Jianglu was likely the mentor Lu Quan had found for him. Showing goodwill immediately was the right move. Lu Quan cleared his throat and said, That's right, it's him. But has a rookie who can't pilot a mech yet? You'll need to put in the effort to teach him first. He can't pilot a mech. What can he do? Jianglu frowned at Li Xin. I know basic infantry and armored vehicle command. Li Xin replied sheepishly. A recruit. Boss, I know I upset you, but you can't just dump a clueless greenhorn on me. Jianglu immediately bristled, slamming his hands on Lu Quan's desk. Lu Quan sighed and said, There's no other choice. Everyone's suffered heavy losses. Besides your squad, no one's at full strength. We don't know when the backup troops will arrive. A recruit is still a soldier, at least he can fill a slot. Better than no one, right? Boss, if you'd given me a recruit who could pilot a mech, or even an experienced infantryman, I'd manage. But here's a rookie who can't even pilot a mech. If I have to teach him and then take him into battle, are you trying to get me killed? Jianglu poured out his grievances. Lu Quan's face hardened. You'll take this soldier whether you want to or not. Giving you a fresh recruit is already a favor considering our years of friendship. We don't know when the next batch of recruits will arrive. Your 4-person squad is down to 2. Are you going to face your next mission with just your heads? Jianglu was left speechless by Lu Quan's words. Lu Quan concluded, if you really don't want him, I'll assign him to old Li. But in warning you, when the next recruits come is anyone's guess. Ah. Jianglu let out a long helpless sigh. Fine, I'll take him. He finally relented. Good as yours? Train him well. Lu Quan said. Yes, boss. Jianglu saluted. Lu Quan then turned to Li Xin. From today on, you're part of Jianglu's combat squad. Learn well from him. Yes, sir. Li Xin quickly saluted as well. Leaving Lu Quan's office, Li Xin followed Jianglu. Throughout the walk, Jianglu remained silent with a dark expression. Seeing this, Li Xin dared not speak, fearing he might say something wrong and get reprimanded. Finally, they stopped in front of a large building. Jianglu turned to Li Xin, his stern face gradually softening but still serious. Hey soldier, what's your name? Li Xin quickly saluted and shouted, Master, my name is Li Xin. Jianglu frowned. Don't call me master. Yes, master. Li Xin called out obediently. Jianglu's frown deepened. Call me whatever you want, but I'm not your master. Yes, master. Li Xin continued shouting. Having lived 2 lives, Li Xin knew this wasn't the time to be thin-skinned. He had to call him master. If he met a good person, it was a win. If he met a bad leader, this address might at least stir some sympathy, softening any harsh treatment. He had to call him master. If he met a good person, it was a win. If he met a bad leader, this address might at least stir some sympathy, softening any harsh treatment. Since you're part of our squad now, let me fill you in. Jianglu said as he opened the alloy door. In the dim corridor, Jianglu's voice echoed, were a mobile mech support unit dispatched by Blueprint Biotech Group to Hengan Security. From now on, you're my squad member, part of the Task Force Mobile Mech Support 5th Squad. Yes, master. The 5th Squad standard formation is 4 mechs for pilots each, with an auxiliary soldier squad plus a mechanic repair team. But right now, besides me, there's only 1 veteran pilot left, named Feng Dai. The other 2 pilots from the 5th Squad died in previous battles. You're here to take one of their places. Li Xin asked softly, Master, isn't the survival rate for mech pilots supposed to be high? Why are the losses so severe? Survival rate is relative. Compared to those poor infantry grunts, mech pilots do have it better. But even so, a D-class mech isn't invincible. When it's time to die, you die. As he spoke, Jiang Lu led Li Xin out of the dim corridor into a vast hall. In the distance stood for colossal war machines. Li Xin's breath slowed. These were the mobile mechs. It turned out that the interior of this colossal structure was the mecha warehouse. Under the illumination of the lights, four enormous combat mechs stood motionless in place. Li Xin's identity information had now been changed to M1D3 intern combat mecha pilot Li Xin. Consequently, his authorization was automatically updated. At that moment, as his gaze fell upon the leading mecha, his neural chip naturally began to scan and retrieve the information pertaining to that mecha. This was a Class D mecha designated as the Short-Sword Squire. The mecha stood at a height of 7.13 meters. It was a humanoid mecha with the pilot's cockpit situated in the chest area. This location boasted the thickest defensive armor of the entire mecha. The mecha's standard cruising speed was 80 km/h, while its maximum combat speed was 65 km/h. The weapon system of the Short-Sword Squire was exceptionally formidable. Designed with modularity in mind, its left arm could be equipped with a 6-barreled 20mm rotary cannon along with one of the following: a 120mm electromagnetic cannon, an 85mm plasma cannon, or a 55mm laser cannon. Each weapon was suited for different combat scenarios and could be swapped out before battle based on the mission requirements and the anticipated enemy. The right arm of the Short-Sword Squire could mount melee weapons: a power hammer, a power sword, a power halberd, or a chainsword. On the shoulders of the Short-Sword Squire, 2 missile pods or 2 rocket pods could be mounted for anti-air strikes or to unleash a more powerful barrage on ground targets. The Short-Sword Squire was not only powerful in attack but also formidable in defense. Its chassis was constructed entirely from Class D military-grade composite alloy. It could withstand attacks from various caliber weapons. For instance, even its own 120mm electromagnetic cannon required at least 3 shots to penetrate this alloy armor. However, this was merely the base armor of the Short-Sword Squire. Due to its modular design, the pilot could add composite armor before battle, sacrificing mobility for enhanced defense. Beneath the pilot's feet in the chest cavity of the Short-Sword Squire lay a special device, the Void Shield Generator. It could be activated with psychic energy to project a void shield, bolstering the mecha's defensive capabilities. The void shield could envelop the entire Short-Sword Squire. By channeling psychic energy and drawing power from the mecha's internal reactor, it could shunt incoming ranged attacks into the warp. This served to enhance the defensive resilience of the Short-Sword Squire. However, the void shield was not omnipotent. It had a maximum threshold. If the enemy's attack was too powerful or concentrated exceeding this limit, the void shield would become overloaded. Once overloaded, the void shield would temporarily lose its defensive capability. Furthermore, it could not defend against melee attacks or point-blank shots fired from within the shield's range. In simple terms, the void shield could block most ranged attacks, but it was primarily effective against energy weapons or high-velocity projectiles. It was largely ineffective against slower-moving projectiles and melee attacks. Even so, the advent of the void shield significantly increased the battlefield survival rate of the Short-Sword Squire. The Short-Sword Squire had no head. After all, it was not truly human, and as a mecha it did not require a separate head as a critical weak point. The pilot was situated in the mecha's chest and all primary equipment was housed within the torso. The mecha's power source, a subatomic microfusion reactor, was mounted on its back. Combat endurance could be extended by adding solid fuel units. Notably, the use of plasma cannons, laser cannons, and electromagnetic cannons consumed a significant amount of energy. Energy was the core of the mecha. Without it, the mecha lost all mobility, becoming nothing more than a giant humanoid coffin. Nevertheless, mechas rarely needed to worry about energy shortages. A single refuel typically provided enough energy to sustain operations for over half a month. Li Xin gazed at the mecha and the data provided by his neural chip. His horizons broadened. Under normal circumstances, mechas were entirely unnecessary. To design a truly effective war machine, the bipedal stability of a mecha was poor and multi-leg designs were overly complex. For all-terrain combat, the optimal solution remained tracked vehicles. A humanoid form presented a larger target area and a higher center of gravity, making it prone to tipping over. Thus, the design should be as low profile as possible. If weapons were to be wielded like a Gundam firing a rifle, it would be an exercise in redundancy. It was far better to integrate the weapons directly into the vehicle chassis. When all these factors were combined, the end result was inevitably a tank. However, the march of progress always left weapon designers scratching their heads. A serendipitous breakthrough led to the development of the Void Shield, a defensive system mounted on large vehicles that fundamentally changed the nature of warfare. With the advent of a more powerful shield on the battlefield, a correspondingly powerful spear was not immediately forthcoming. Clever designers soon realized that melee weapons could bypass the Void Shield's defenses. Thus the humanoid mecha was born. Piloted by psychics, it could wield a variety of powerful ranged weapons, mount a void shield, and employ various powered melee weapons. The emergence of psychics and void shields transferred the title of King of the Land Battlefield from tanks to combat mechs. No, not just the King of the Land Battlefield, they were the kings of war. In the void of space, mechs also proved to be exceptionally effective. Of course, tanks were not rendered obsolete just as infantry were not. With their adaptable capabilities, tanks remained a formidable armored support force. Void shields required a psychic to activate and control, which meant that most tanks could not be equipped with them. Although tanks remained a powerful armored force, they could no longer rival mechs. Li Xin looked at the mechs before him, his eyes burning with passion. What man could resist such magnificent machines? However, there was one flaw among the 4 mechs in the warehouse. Only the first 3 were in good condition. The last one appeared severely damaged. The final mecha had its right arm completely severed and its chest and abdomen were pried open. The cockpit was fully exposed with the canopy and outer armor panels lying to the side. Seeing the torn wounds and twisted armor on the canopy and outer plating, the fervor in Li Xin's heart abruptly chilled. What is this? Li Xin asked tentatively. Jiang Lu said in a deep voice, you've seen it all, haven't you? This mecha is destroyed. Its frontal armor was torn apart by the enemy and the pilot died in the cockpit. Jiang Lu led Li Xin to the shattered armor. Beside the severely damaged mecha, some people were busy working. Their attire bore obvious logistics insignias, clearly indicating they were mecha logistics mechanics. Captain Jiang. A mechanic greeted him proactively and Jiang Lu nodded slightly in response. Some cast curious glances at Li Xin following Jiang Lu, but due to their work they dared not come over to greet him. Pointing to another mecha before him, Jiang Lu said, it's not just this one was also damaged on the battlefield. However, this one suffered lighter damage and has now been repaired. Only when Li Xin approached did he realize that this mecha was also covered in battle scars with many scratches on the surface of its armor. Though not obvious, leaving scratches on D-grade composite military alloy required at least large-caliber weapons. Li Xin then looked at the torn cockpit canopy and the composite armor on the ground. The armor bore several massive bullet marks, but these were not fatal. The lethal wound was a gap that seemed to have been torn open. Jiang Lu walked over to Li Xin and asked, do you know what caused this? Li Xin shook his head. Jiang Lu sighed and said it was torn open by a power claw. The claw bypassed the void shield's defense and ripped open his cockpit canopy. Then an electromagnetic cannon shot followed through the gap into the mech's cockpit, turning my comrade into tomato paste, although he and I usually didn't get along seeing him like this. Jiang Lu's words trailed off. Li Xin could feel the sorrow in the dark-faced man's voice. He was almost choking with emotion. Jiang Lu gazed at the shattered cockpit canopy for a long time before turning to Li Xin and saying, do you see? Even a mecha called the King of War, piloted by a veteran, can fall so easily in battle. So what about you, a military trainee who only studied basic infantry command? Do you think you're better than him? Jiang Lu asked this question with obvious emotion. Li Xin took a deep breath and said, Master, I will study piloting skills diligently and strive to survive a little longer. Jiang Lu said darkly, some things can't be mastered just by studying hard. A rookie piloting a mecha on the battlefield is like telling everyone there's a greenhorn here. Do you think piloting a mecha will help you live longer? But in telling you, because of the critical impact a mecha has on battle, almost everyone will put a magnifying glass on you. Once they find out you're a rookie. I think you know the consequences of that on the battlefield. Did Li Xin know? Of course he did. Although he had never fought in his past life, he had played games. On the battlefield you always target the weak. He'll work hard to make sure they don't see him a rookie. Master. Li Xin didn't know what else to say. First impressions are hard to change. Li Xin was indeed a rookie and Jiang Lu wasn't wrong. His prejudice, or rather his honest assessment, was perfectly normal. I told you not to call me master. Jiang Lu almost roared. Seeing Jiang Lu's bloodshot eyes, Li Xin felt that these 2 mechs must have held his disciples. As for the fate of the previous disciple, judging by these 2 mechs, it was certainly not good. So Li Xin wisely backed down and said yes. Jiang Lu turned around and Li Xin quickly followed. Since you've joined the 5th squad, I will teach you seriously, but you know nothing now, so you need to download some materials. Basic mecha operation. Understanding psionic energy. D-class mecha short sword squire. Advanced mecha piloting techniques. Psionics and mecha. Void shield usage and post-overload restart. In total 12 courses were listed by Jiang Lu. Thanks to Chip Zero, Li Xin had no trouble recording these course names. But truly mastering the knowledge of these courses would require dull and night study. The chip was the chip and Li Xin was Li Xin. When the difficulty of acquiring and recording knowledge decreased, the key became asking questions. That was how chip downloaded knowledge worked. Li Xin could use his authority to download this knowledge, but mastering it required his own time investment. Of course, the advantage of a biointelligent chip was that it enabled faster learning. That was the support provided by the chip, and he had 2D for level chips. Double the learning speed was the source of Li Xin's confidence in mastering knowledge more quickly. Jiang Lu continued ahead. The war zone is not safe. You heard what the supervisor said. When the next battle begins, you will also have to join the fight. At that time, even if you have to be dragged, you'll be thrown onto the battlefield, even if just as a fixed turret or even as a decoy to absorb or attract fire. So you must master all theoretical knowledge as quickly as possible. Yes, master. Li Xin responded loudly. Jiang Lu paused, but this time he couldn't be bothered to correct Li Xin. He continued, this military base has no mecha simulators, so every stellar day during the day I'll set aside 5 hours for you to practice in a real mecha. I believe combining theory and practice will speed up your learning. Outside those 5 hours you can arrange your own time, sleep, wander around the base, or to survive a few more days study theoretical knowledge seriously. Thank you, master. During these days, aside from eating and sleeping, I will use all my time to accelerate my study progress. Li Xin was eager to guarantee it. As you wish. Jiang Lu waved his hand indifferently. He led Li Xin to a room upstairs and said, from today this is your dormitory. Although this is your private space, I still remind you to maintain proper hygiene. Yes, master. Meals are served every 6 hours in the base. Mecha pilots are entitled to devil rations. I've sent you the location of the mess hall. Yes, master. Jiang Lu departed. Li Xin remained in his own quarters, taking a satisfied deep breath. It hadn't been easy, after all these years on the planet Guansuo, for this was the first time he had such a spacious room. The tiny room at the repair shop was not worth mentioning, cluttered with all sorts of discarded metal parts, leaving barely enough space to turn around. Back in school as a military trainee at Blueprint Biotech's academy, he was assigned a basic occupation, sharing a dormitory with 7 others. Now Li Xin had finally, through his own efforts, obtained a residence exceeding 30 square meters. This was truly no small feat. Outside the door, a logistics staff member delivered his combat suit and daily necessities. As for the 2 uniforms allocated by Blueprint Biotech's defense division, they were more akin to ceremonial attire, hardly suitable for combat. Li Xin changed his clothes and began to immerse himself in a state of learning. In his past life he hadn't studied diligently and had suffered greatly for it. This led Li Xin to study very earnestly in this life, but unfortunately his reincarnation wasn't in a favorable place. On the planet Guansuo, for being a good student alone was far from sufficient. Moreover, much knowledge was beyond his access privileges. He had no opportunity to learn even if he desired. Seated in his chair, Li Xin began studying the courses downloaded into his chip. Soon faint fluctuations of psionic energy emanated within the room. Through the course on understanding psionics, Li Xin gained deeper insights into his own psionic power. He also learned more methods for utilizing psionics, one of which was employing it to accelerate his learning. This application did not draw upon warp energy like combat would, making it relatively safe. During this process, Li Xin discovered that his psionic chip far surpassed Blueprint Biotech's D for Smart Chip in terms of learning efficiency. Apologies, D for Smart Chip. Subsequently, Li Xin began to focus more on acquiring knowledge through the psionic chip, channeling greater psionic energy into it to accelerate his learning pace. Basic mecha operations 31. Void shield usage and post-overload restart 23. With the chip's assistance, Li Xin's learning became quantifiable and its influence significantly sped up his progress. Yet learning was monotonous and mind-numbing. After studying intensely for 7 or 8 hours, Li Xin's head was spinning with fatigue. At the peak of his concentration, he could even feel wisps of steam rising from his forehead. When he paused his studies, he glanced at his wristband. It was already night. Li Xin's last meal had been in the morning. After so many hours and such rigorous study, his energy reserves were completely depleted. Now Li Xin felt a burning hunger in his stomach, as if he could devour an entire ox. He opened a crate beside the table which contained his ration of energy paste, flavored energy paste at that. He had just taken out a tube when something occurred to him. He checked the time. Only 20 minutes remained until the next cafeteria meal service. Recalling Jiang Lu's words, mech pilots enjoy devil food rations. Li Xin's mouth began to water uncontrollably. He glanced at the military energy paste in his hand and casually tossed it back into the crate. Sorry, military energy paste. It's not that you taste bad, but Lord Li Xin is off to sample what devil rations really taste like. Following the chip's map guidance, Li Xin, clad in his mech pilot combat uniform, soon arrived at the cafeteria. It was now night on Guansuo 4 and the cafeteria was sparsely populated, mostly by soldiers who had just finished their shifts. Li Xin followed the dining instructions to a counter, the devil ration section. Gazing at the food on display, he couldn't hold back. Saliva flooded his mouth. The food here was quite simple. The devil wasn't a high tier, but it included meat. Li Xin casually selected several meat dishes, deciding to skip the vegetables for now. Eating meat could fill you up. Li Xin ate heartily. The flavor in his past life wouldn't even qualify as fast food. Any owner with such culinary skills would go bankrupt within half a month. But this was Guangzhou, for a planet where food was severely scarce and most people could only subsist on energy paste. To eat non-paste food, to have meat, Li Xin was so moved that tears welled in his eyes. Delicious. Flavorful. After the late-night meal, Li Xin returned to his quarters and lay down. The intense study session had drained his energy enormously. Though he had psionic energy to alleviate fatigue, it was now depleted and needed replenishment through sleep. After a brief 4 or 5 hours of rest, Li Xin awoke naturally and resumed his studies. As the sky gradually brightened, he arrived at the hangar. With a click, Li Xin flipped the switch, and under the lights the short-sword squires stood like colossal beasts. He approached one of the mechs, gently stroking its external armor. Magnificent. Absolutely magnificent. Before Li Xin could admire it for long, Jianglu arrived. You're here quite early? I want to learn faster, Li Xin replied honestly. Did you review yesterday's materials? Jianglu asked. Reporting master, I did, but there's still much content I haven't finished. Li Xin replied loudly. Indeed, he hadn't finished. Even a single tutorial would take days to go through, let alone comprehend. And yesterday Jianglu had directly assigned 12 such courses. It's normal not to finish. Come on, get up here, I'll give you a live demonstration. Jianglu's voice was stern. The mech before them opened its external armor and cockpit canopy, revealing the pilot's seat inside. This short-sword squire had been damaged before and subsequently repaired. It seemed this mech was to be assigned to Li Xin. Jianglu directly levitated into the cockpit. Witnessing this, Li Xin could only feel envy. It was an application of psionics, and his own psionic reserves were too meager to achieve such a feat. Li Xin obediently fetched a ladder from the side and climbed into the cockpit. The short-sword squire's cockpit was not spacious. At the center was the pilot's seat with several control levers in front. On both sides there were some buttons, but not many. The mech's compact size meant that accommodating more equipment, energy and ammunition inevitably compressed the pilot's space. Sit in the pilot's seat, Jianglu said calmly. Li Xin sat down obediently while Jianglu rested one foot on the cockpit's edge, holding onto the canopy frame as he stood. It seemed that for this lesson Jianglu had no intention of closing the canopy. Li Xin surveyed the cockpit environment. If the canopy were shut, there truly would be no place for Jianglu to stay. Li Xin surveyed the interior environment of the mech cockpit. It was relatively cramped, yet the seats were ergonomically designed. His gaze swept over the various buttons, and the chip automatically explained the names and functions of these buttons to Li Xin through its permissions. Contrary to Li Xin's expectations, he thought there would be hundreds if not more buttons inside the mech. After all, in his memories from the previous life, even a fighter jet's cockpit was filled with instruments and buttons. To his surprise, the buttons and switches on both sides of the mech cockpit totaled fewer than 20. Mechs are different from other combat vehicles. Each mech requires a spiritual energy user to operate, while tanks and aircraft do not necessarily need one. Controlling a mech relies more on your spiritual energy rather than these buttons. Jianglu seemed to sense Li Xin's confusion and began to explain. Yes, Master. Li Xin quickly responded. Now activate the mech by pressing the switch on your left, Jianglu instructed. Li Xin immediately followed Jianglu's instructions, pressing the switch to activate the mech. He had seen this switch earlier, but without the command from a leader he did not dare to act recklessly. As the switch was pressed, a faint buzzing sound emanated from the mech, signaling that it had been activated. Even the cockpit interior lit up with a soft glow. Short sword servant. Activate, an electronic voice announced. Jianglu added, use your smart chip to authorize the connection with the mech. Li Xin quickly authorized the connection with his chip. Once Zero and the mech were connected, he suddenly felt the entire presence of the mech. Jianglu said, release your spiritual energy and connect with the mech, feel its entire existence. Following Jianglu's guidance, Li Xin used his spiritual energy to sense the mech. Indeed, after the smart chip connected with the mech, releasing spiritual energy felt entirely different. In that moment, Li Xin felt as though a layer of metallic body and additional mech enveloped his own body. This sensation was fascinating and exhilarating. Observing Li Xin's face flush with excitement, Jianglu remained calm, having seen this scene many times. Every new mech operator experiences this during their first bond with the mech. All right, disconnect. Today's first hour task is to practice connecting and disconnecting from the mech. Practice 100 times. Jianglu's serious voice rang out. Yes, Master. Li Xin responded loudly, then quickly disconnected his spiritual energy. After disconnecting, he felt a sense of loss. Compared to the powerful body of the mech, his own body seemed too fragile. Then Li Xin began to follow Jiang Lu's commands, repeatedly connecting and disconnecting with the mech. After 100 times, Li Xin's mood gradually shifted from excitement to numbness. Although the initial disconnection felt disappointing, it became less significant with repeated practice. Next, Jiang Lu guided Li Xin to slowly try more operations. The buttons and control stick in the cockpit are meant for use during non-combat periods. They can control the movement of your mech and perform basic shooting and combat actions. While piloting the mech, you must conserve your spiritual energy at all times, or else you will become a living target on the battlefield when your energy runs out. Outside the hangar, a mech stripped of its weapons slowly moved. Jiang Lu stood on the mech's shoulder, loudly instructing Li Xin, who had closed the cockpit. It was the second day of practicing piloting the mech, and Li Xin had already familiarized himself with the buttons, officially starting to pilot the mech. In fact, piloting a mech was not as difficult as imagined. Most people could quickly grasp it after practical operation. However, while it was easy to get started mastering, it was much harder. Inside the cockpit, Li Xin was thrilled as he used the buttons and control stick to maneuver the mech. The movement was quite stiff, and it was clear this posture could not be used for combat. After practicing for a while and getting used to the buttons and control stick, he declared to start using spiritual energy to drive. Yes, Master. In the next moment, the mech became much more agile, taking small steps, running fast, and even jumping forwards, backwards, and sideways. At that moment, the mech could almost be compared to a giant, though it was still not as nimble as a real human. However, achieving such movements was already quite difficult, considering this was only a D-class mech. The sounds produced by the large mech during training in the training ground were tremendous, especially when running and jumping. But inside the cockpit, Li Xin appeared exceptionally excited. No man would remain indifferent after piloting a mech and performing such movements. Left and right punches. Left hook. Right hook. Side kick. Knee strike. Powerful flying kick. Defense block. As Jiang Lu's commands echoed from the mech's shoulder, Li Xin, piloting the mech, continually performed various moves. Use the control stick and buttons to operate the mech. Before Li Xin could enjoy himself for too long, Jiang Lu issued the latest command. There was no choice. Li Xin had to stop the joy of using spiritual energy and revert to mechanical operation. In a corner of Li Xin's vision, there was a chip projection of the learning progress D1 class mech close combat progress 5-6. 2 chips, double the joy, and the learning progress was increasing rapidly. Feel your weapon, do not make your movement soft. Aim at the target, fire. Boom. The 6-barrel cannon on the left arm of the mech erupted with a roar, showering dense ammunition forward. This was in the shooting range. Under the cover of the cannon fire, the target hundreds of meters away was directly shredded by the dense fire. Woohoo! So satisfying! Li Xin yelled in joy inside the mech. The feeling of firing was truly exhilarating. Currently, the 6-barrel cannon used by Li Xin was an electromagnetic cannon, which was also the most commonly used cannon by the short sword servant. It only required energy supply and ensured ammunition supply to maintain the density of fire, but one could not fire continuously, otherwise the carried ammunition would quickly run out. Boom! At the center of the 6-barrel cannon was a 120mm electromagnetic cannon which had significant power using solid projectiles. The projectiles, accelerated by electromagnetism, struck the target at an incredibly high speed. Even a tank could not withstand this hit. D1 class mech long-range tactical progress 3642. This was already the 19th day of Li Xin's training with the mech. He was indeed lucky as he arrived during the troops' rest period. This allowed him to have ample time for training, preventing him from stepping onto the battlefield completely unprepared. However, Li Xin's days of ease had finally come to an end. On the 20th day, the training concluded. An alarm blared within the base, and all soldiers and officers began their preparations at the fastest possible speed. The battle was imminent. Inside the hangar of the 5th Squad, Li Xin stood beside Jiang Lu. 3 individuals clad in mecha suits formed a line and, led by Jiang Lu, proceeded toward the base's command center. Jiang Lu, Feng Dai, and Li Xin. Feng Dai had returned to the base on the 4th day of Li Xin's training. He had been injured in the previous battle and had been granted a few days of leave to recuperate. On the way to the command center, Li Xin's palms were slick with sweat. He couldn't help but feel tense, even though he had undergone years of basic training and had recently learned to pilot a mecha. Yet when the specter of war truly loomed, Li Xin still felt a pang of unease. Sensing his anxiety, Feng Dai patted him on the shoulder and offered reassurance. Don't worry, it's no big deal. Once we're in our mechs, the fight is just about blasting away. Just enjoy the thrill. Li Xin nodded repeatedly. Got it, brother Feng. Jiang Lu cast a glance at Li Xin but ultimately said nothing. His furrowed brow spoke volumes about his thoughts. Upon entering the command building, they arrived at a conference room. Several people were already seated and the number was slowly increasing. Eventually, under Li Xin's watchful eye, the count settled at 23, including himself. Footsteps echoed from outside the door, and Lu Quan, the M3D15 defense director, entered the room. Director! Almost everyone stood up simultaneously and saluted. Lu Quan returned the salute before speaking. After 20 days of rest, everyone seems to have recovered their spirits well. This time we have a new mission. Lu Quan's gaze swept across everyone present, pausing for a fraction longer on Li Xin. A projection appeared on the screen behind him, displaying a map. This is our target. Next, I will authorize you to access its intelligence. Simultaneously, Li Xin's chip received the authorization for the data. As he downloaded it, he listened to Lu Quan continue describing the objective. The Beishimo Steelworks. Our mission this time is to seize this stronghold once more. No sooner had Lu Quan's voice faded than someone muttered softly, "Why this place again? How did Hengan Defense lose this stronghold? How Hengan Defense lost this stronghold is none of our concern. Our current task is to capture it again. This time Hengan Defense will coordinate with us in the assault. On the frontal battlefield they will deploy a motorized combined arms brigade of infantry as the main offensive force, while we will provide support. On both flanks of the Beishimo Steelworks, Hengan Defense will also be responsible with 1 infantry regiment and 1 armored battalion tasked with pinning down and intercepting enemy reinforcements. Our mission is to completely capture this stronghold before the reinforcements from the Milder Knights and their auxiliary forces break through Hengan Defense's blocking line. Do you have confidence?" Lu Quan's stern eye surveyed the crowd below. "Yes." The mecha pilots below responded in unison with resounding voices. "Excellent. Now let's assign the tasks. Squad leaders, come forward." Lu Quan took out a slim computer and began to delineate the assignments on it. Jiang Lu along with the other squad leaders gathered around Lu Quan. There were 8 squad leaders in total, representing 8 mecha support squads, yet only 23 people were in this room. As expected, it wasn't just Jiang Lu's 5th squad, the other squads were also under strength. Li Xin let out an almost imperceptible sigh. There was no time for further thought. He began to review the downloaded data. The data contained a topographical map of the Beishimo Steelworks and its historical background. This steelworks was a large-scale facility built decades ago, which was quickly abandoned after the war began. But even without any workers inside, the vast reinforced concrete structures and complex underground passages made it an excellent combat stronghold. The battle for the Beishimo Steelworks was not a first, counting this time it would be the 3rd intense conflict to erupt here. In the previous 2 instances, Hengan Defense and the Blueprint Expeditionary Force had cleared the enemy and occupied this location. However, this stronghold was of great strategic importance. After losing it, the Milder Knights had not given up their intention to recapture it. Each time after the Blueprint Expeditionary Force withdrew, the enemy would use superior forces to retake the stronghold. The Milder Knights were another major faction on this planet. Though not as powerful as Blueprint, they were still a formidable adversary. For now, neither side seemed intent on triggering a full-scale war, engaging only in small-scale skirmishes and provocations. The previous 2 battles had already shown that the Beishimo Steelworks was a meat grinder for soldiers. Not only did infantry suffer heavy casualties here, but armored units and even mechs faced high attrition rates if caught in a siege. The steelworks' robust construction combined with various metal equipment provided defensive capabilities that rivaled some fortresses. Li Xin couldn't help but click his tongue in awe as he reviewed the current state of the Beishimo Steelworks in the data. Many buildings had collapsed into rubble from previous battles, but even the ruins were solid. Once inside, one would likely face a brutal urban fight. No one could tell which pile of debris might conceal an enemy ambush. The Beishimo Steelworks would become for the 3rd time a grinding mill for Hengan Defense and the Blueprint Expeditionary Force. Li Xin frowned, then slowly relaxed his brow. At least he wasn't an infantryman, he piloted a mecha. Mecha were slightly better off. If he were an infantryman fighting here, that would be truly grim. In the previous 2 battles for the Beishimo Steelworks, the casualty rates for infantry and armored troops had remained alarmingly high. If Li Xin were an infantryman, he might, as Jiao Bingyang had once predicted, have a high probability of being killed in action within 2 weeks or even a month after the battle began. According to the records, the first capture of the Beishimo Steelworks took a month and a half. The second time took even longer, 2.5 months. Both sides had recognized the stronghold's importance. Each time it was captured, more modifications and repairs were made, along with the construction of more complex defensive lines. The casualties in the second assault on the Beishimo Steelworks were a full 26% higher than the first. And now the 3rd battle for control was about to begin. All right, the task assignment is complete. Go back and prepare yourselves. We set out for the war zone tomorrow. Lu Quan packed up his computer and left. After exchanging pleasantries with the other team leaders, Jiang Lu led Li Xin and the others away. However, this time they did not return directly to the hangar but headed toward a different location. Looking at their final destination, it was the quartermaster's office. Feng Dai noticed Li Xin's confusion and said the team leader is here to get us some good stuff. Good stuff. You'll see in a moment. Upon entering they found not only Jianglu's 5th team but also other combat teams present. As the line dwindled it was finally Li Xin's turn. We're here to collect the No. 5D1 psionic compound potion. Jianglu announced. Another combat mission starting. The quartermaster, a middle-aged man who seemed to know Jianglu, asked. It's starting again, another meat grinder. Jianglu shook his head with a sigh. Sign here. Your quota this time is 5 bottles per person. Use them sparingly. The quartermaster handed a document to Jianglu. There were not only paper documents but also electronic ones. After signing, Jianglu received a small white box from the quartermaster. Feng Dai and Li Xin quickly collected their boxes as well. Feng Dai wanted to say something but a glance from Jianglu silenced him. We'll talk back at the base. Jianglu said. Li Xin, observing this, felt a twinge of doubt, but clearly no one was about to explain things to him. They soon returned to the hangar. In a room within the hangar, Jianglu activated a projection displaying a topographical map of the Beishimo steel mill. This colossal steel mill covered an area of 62 square kilometers, roughly equivalent to nearly 10,000 football fields. Moreover, the steel mill was a multi-story structure with underground levels extending to a depth of 85 meters. It contained a network of underground tunnels totaling nearly 100 kilometers in length and dozens of entrances and exits of varying sizes. Of course, these were the initial records. After several brutal battles, the terrain had changed. Some tunnels had collapsed, some entrances were buried, yet new ones had emerged from the debris. Combined with the defenders' multiple rounds of modifications, the terrain's complexity had multiplied several times over. On the map, the entire steel mill was divided into blocks, over 100 in total, each marked with a serial number and color. Jianglu pointed to one section and said, "This is the area our team will be responsible for. We're relatively lucky. Based on reconnaissance and previous data, the defenses here are only moderate, within our capabilities." Feng Dai's face lit up with joy. That's good news. But there's bad news too. Jianglu shook his head and continued. Due to the earlier fighting, many underground tunnels have collapsed, creating some spaces large enough for mechs to enter. So this time we have to go underground. That's where the real danger lies. Feng Dai frowned. Wait, our mechs are huge. We're going down there. Jianglu's face darkened. Reconnaissance has already spotted enemy mechs underground, so we have no choice but to fight down there. Otherwise, clearing the surface alone won't do much to capture the Beishimo steel mill. Damn it. Those brain-dead bastards. Are they out of their minds? Feng Dai cursed in anger. Enough complaining. Use the time now to study the intel and get prepared. Jianglu said. Yes, master. Li Xin had been listening for a while and finally got his chance to speak. Then Jianglu turned to Li Xin and asked, have you heard of today's No. 5D1 psionic compound potion before? Li Xin shook his head. No, I only learned about it from the chip just now. According to the data, the No. 5 psionic compound potion is used by scions to restore their psionic energy. Generally, after a scion's own energy is depleted, taking a dose can rapidly restore a large amount of psionic power in a short time. It's a valuable asset in combat, but its use isn't limited to battles. Consuming this psionic compound potion can also enhance one's psionic energy, with long-term use yielding even better results. However, overuse carries the risk of deepening chaos contamination. Each bottle of this potion costs around 200 energy coins, but it rarely appears on the open market. Given Li Xin's current salary, it would take him several months just to afford one bottle. Since joining the Defense Department of Blueprint Biotechnology Group, Li Xin's salary at the M1D3 level was 40 energy coins per month, with interns earning 5 less, netting 35. But because Li Xin was stationed in a war zone, he received double pay amounting to 70 energy coins per month. Now, as he was about to officially enter the battlefield, his salary would increase with combat subsidies. Starting tomorrow, his monthly income would reach 105 energy coins. This salary would continue until he withdrew from the battlefield and returned to the military base. Yet even with such high pay, it would take 2 months to afford a single bottle of No. 5D1 psionic compound potion, showing just how generous the military supply was. Give me 2 bottles. I need them. Jianglu extended his hand to Li Xin with a stern expression. Li Xin's smiling face froze instantly. His mind raced with a flurry of thoughts, countless reasons to refuse flashing through his head. But one by one he discarded them. All right, master. Li Xin lowered his gaze, then opened the box containing the potion supply. He took out 2 bottles and handed them to Jianglu. It was impossible not to feel a pang of pain. Li Xin had called him master for days, never expecting Jianglu to be so ruthless. But Li Xin had no choice. As a greenhorn about to enter the battlefield, he needed someone to guide him. Even at such a steep price, Li Xin had to pay it. Jiang Lu took the bottles and turned to leave, saying to Feng Dai, help him get acclimated to combat and pick out suitable weapons. Got it, Chief. Feng Dai nodded, then slung an arm around Li Xin's shoulder and led him toward the mechs. The support soldiers assigned to the 5th team had been waiting there for some time. Support infantry serve as the other leg of the mech division, much like how armored units coordinate with infantry in combined arms operations. Mech divisions also have their own dedicated support forces. The 5th group comprised for support infantry squads, each consisting of 10 elite soldiers and a team of mechanics, all of which would deploy alongside the mechs. The mechanic teams typically remained outside the battlefield, stationed near the command post or in relatively secure strongpoints. However, the support infantry squads were required to engage in combat alongside the mechs. They drove tracked vehicles following the mechs to transport ammunition and sometimes had to approach the front lines to share the firepower and assist with suppressive fire. Their risk was considerably higher than that of the mech pilots, yet still somewhat safer than that of ordinary infantry or armored personnel. Although the 5th group's mech pilots had not received additional troop reinforcements, the replenishment of these support infantry was remarkably swift. Despite 2 squads being completely wiped out in previous battles and casualties in the other 2, all had now been fully replenished. Feng Dai led Li Xin to the mech, sliding open a lightweight laptop as he spoke. This time we're heading to the Beishimo steel mill, and this battle won't be over quickly. Do you have any thoughts on the weapons your mech should carry? Li Xin shook his head and replied, I've never actually used a mech in combat before, and my mind is blank right now. Brother Feng, please help me decide. My only requirement is a power halberd for close combat. The power halberd was one of the melee weapon options for the short sword squire. This weapon was about 10 meters long with a blade nearly 2 meters in length. The halberd blade was crafted from extremely precious materials, typically rare metals like adamantite, which were not only hard but also capable of withstanding the immense energy generated by the disintegration field. The disintegration field on the halberd's blade was the ideal weapon against enemy mechs or other vehicles equipped with void shield. When activated, the disintegration field enveloped the blade in a faint blue electrical glow capable of disintegrating matter at the molecular level. Even the armored alloys of mechs would shatter under the assault of the disintegration field. Li Xin's choice of this weapon was simple. Both the power hammer and power sword demanded high combat skills. The halberd was the only weapon Li Xin could handle relatively well, as during his military training he had only practiced with short knives and rifle bayonets. The halberd could maximize Li Xin's close combat potential, though it was still far from proficient. Feng Dai nodded and continued, alright then, I'll configure it based on my own ideas. First, a 6-barreled autocannon is essential, so I'll equip you with a 20mm electromagnetic autocannon. For the main weapon, considering the complex terrain of Beishimo steel mill and our prolonged engagement, I'll mount an 85mm plasma cannon. For the shoulder-mounted weapon, since the battle at Beishimo shouldn't involve air defense, we can skip the anti-air missiles. Given your limited experience, how about we equip you with 2 Sawtooth and Type 12-cell rocket pods? These are 105mm rockets with excellent firepower, effective against both armored units and infantry. Sometimes you don't even need to aim, just fire away. For close combat, well, go with your choice, the power halberd. It might be a bit cumbersome in the factory area, but considering your experience and feel for it, this is the way to go. What do you think of this setup? After completing the configuration, Feng Dai looked at Li Xin. Having listened to Feng Dai's configuration and analysis, Li Xin was quite satisfied with the weapon loadout. He had used all these weapons before, though only on the firing range, but at least he had operated them and understood their power clearly. No problem, I'll go with Brother Feng's setup. Alright, get moving. Equip Li Xin's mech according to this configuration. Feng Dai instructed the mechanic team, who had been waiting nearby. As for my mech and the heads, there's no need to change the configuration for now, just replenish the ammunition and so forth. Yes, sir. The maintenance team leader saluted and immediately led his men to work. With nothing else to do, Feng Dai climbed into his own mech and began checking its status. Li Xin thought for a moment and then recovered from the earlier feeling of being shaken down. He had mentally prepared for this, though facing it in reality was still somewhat unpleasant. However, after the weapon configuration was finalized, he managed to pull himself together. He also entered the cockpit of his mech, watching as the mechanics installed each weapon onto the frame. Feeling the mech growing stronger with each addition, his heart surged with excitement. Suddenly remembering something, Feng Dai opened his cockpit and shouted to Li Xin, I think we should add an extra set of external armor to your mech. What do you think? External armor will reduce your mobility, but it significantly boosts defense. Li Xin pondered for a moment. External armor would certainly make Li Xin's mech slower, but the increased defense was highly appealing. Li Xin's control over the mech was only at a beginner level. Even if given the chance to perform highly agile maneuvers, he couldn't execute them. With that in mind, it was better to sacrifice flexibility for greater defense, at least to withstand a few more hits when unable to dodge attacks. So he replied, then add a set of external armor. Thus another modification was added to Li Xin's mech. It seemed they were transforming Li Xin's mech into a firepower-oriented platform. But Li Xin found this agreeable since his combat agility and technique were lacking. He would overwhelm the enemy with sheer firepower. First suppress with firepower, eliminate half, then deal with the rest slowly. That way nothing would pose a threat to Li Xin's mech. After bombing the enemies to death, none would get close. Soon as each weapon was mounted onto the mech and the final set of composite armor was attached to Li Xin's machine. From the outside this mech looked at least a size bulkier than Jiang Lu's, but Li Xin's was not the only one. Feng De's mech was similarly outfitted. He too was a mech pilot who trusted in firepower. When Jiang Lu returned from outside, he saw the two mechs that had nearly doubled in size and his own relatively slender machine. He furrowed his brow but said nothing. Jiang Lu's mech ultimately did not carry additional armor plating. His choice of weapons was largely identical to Li Xin's, except that he did not equip two 12-tube rocket launcher pods. For melee combat he selected a power longsword, its massive blade gripped firmly in the mech's right hand. That evening, while everyone else had retired to rest, only Li Xin remained within his mech's cockpit, perhaps from nervousness or perhaps from excitement. He resolved to sleep inside the mech for the night. Before slumber he used his psychic energy to operate the mech on a minor scale, striving to know and familiarize himself with his machine as much as possible. Before departing, Jiang Lu came to the exterior of Li Xin's mech and addressed him. There's no need to be overly tense. The battle won't be too intense at the start, you'll have time to adapt. Remember to rest early and don't be mentally sluggish when the fighting begins. Li Xin's voice echoed from the mech speakers within the cockpit. Yes, master. I understand. I'll get some sleep after I familiarize myself a bit more. Jiang Lu nodded outside and then departed. Li Xin, instead of using psychic energy, manipulated the mech's control sticks and buttons to make it move slightly. Time swiftly arrived at the next day. With the morning light of the star, the military base nearly erupted into activity. Everywhere were elite infantry armed to the teeth, clad in Red Seal 2 semi-integral battle armor, carrying large bags and bundles of equipment. They boarded armored vehicles and formed a long column, leaving the base. Armored vehicles and tanks one after another departed the base with a roar. Next, 23 mechs were lifted away from the base by large helicopter transports. The transport speed of the mechs was far quicker than that of the armored forces. They needed to arrive first at the forward outpost established by Hengan Defense. The helicopter transports flew at a relatively low altitude. Inside the mechs, Li Xin and the other mech pilots were already settled in their cockpits. While the journey to Hengan Defense's forward outpost might not be fraught with danger, it was not entirely safe either. The mech pilots had to remain vigilant at all times. Within the mech's cockpit, Li Xin closed his eyes. Though he did not need to control the mech at that moment, he maintained a state of connection between his psychic energy and the machine. In this state, his neural chip was linked with the mech's radar, enabling reconnaissance of the surrounding environment. Simultaneously, even with his eyes shut, the conditions and environment around the mech were clearly depicted in his mind. This was the effect achieved by combining the mech with psychic energy. Multiple sensors around the mech provided the pilot with a comprehensive field of vision. The mech was formidable. Inside the cockpit, Li Xin, clad in his pilot suit, folded his arms across his chest and awaited their arrival at the outpost with closed eyes. No reckless enemy dared to harass a formation of 23 D-class short-sword squire mechs during the journey. The helicopter transports arrived at the forward outpost without incident. The mech support infantry squad had not yet arrived. Inside his mech, Li Xin opened his eyes. His machine disengaged from the helicopter's sling, advanced slowly and drew near to Jiang Lu's mech. His left arm mounted a 6-barreled 20mm electromagnetic autocannon with an 85mm plasma cannon at its center. His right arm wielded a power halberd, its disintegration field deactivated. A large backpack was attached to the mech's back, carrying reserve ammunition for the autocannon. The cannon's rate of fire was so high that without this reserve system, Li Xin might run out of ammunition mere seconds after opening fire. This large backpack contained only 6,000 rounds for the autocannon. In total, it could not provide sustained full-power fire for very long. Yet such concentrated firepower was virtually unstoppable. Even an opposing mech protected by a void shield would have its shield overloaded after tens of seconds under such a dense barrage. Moreover, Li Xin would not enter battle alone. He would be accompanied by a support infantry squad. Calling them a support squad was perhaps a misnomer. They were more like his ammunition transport team. The majority of the cargo in their armored vehicles consisted of ammunition for the mech. Unless the battle's intensity escalated to the point of annihilating this support squad or preventing them from transporting ammunition in time, Li Xin should not face a shortage. Maintain vigilance. Jiang Lu's voice rang in Li Xin's ears. Yes, Chief. Yes, Master. Feng Dai and Li Xin responded in turn. This was communication within their squad's internal channel. On Jianglu's end there would also be contact with higher command. Over 20 mechs assumed dispersed positions waiting within the forward outpost. The soldiers of Hengan defense stationed at this outpost were accustomed to this. These mechs would usually only relax their vigilance after the infantry and armored forces had arrived. Fortunately, the period of alert was not prolonged. After waiting for over 2 hours, the main force arrived at the base. Armored vehicles, tanks and various large transport trucks arrived at the forward outpost in waves, bringing the entire base to life. Li Xin had no need to coordinate or arrange the subsequent tasks, he merely had to receive orders. The only unit he could command was likely his support squad. This support squad consisted of 2 armored vehicles, both track types. The front of each vehicle mounted a twin-linked 20mm autocannon and a quadruple anti-tank missile launcher. The rear was a fully armored transport vehicle packed with ammunition. The ammunition in this one transport vehicle could replenish Li Xin's mech twice enough to handle most situations. The first day at the forward outpost passed without incident. After the main force entered the forward base, the mech pilots stood down from combat alert. The mechs were driven into a somewhat crude hangar, more accurately a large pit dug into the ground with simple camouflage covering it. After parking his mech, Li Xin followed Jianglu to the forward base's mess hall. The hangar and mechs were temporarily left under the watch of the support squad. The support squad had it tough, they could only eat after Li Xin and the other 2 returned. However, compared to ordinary infantry, their treatment was slightly better, someone would deliver meals to them. Meanwhile, Li Xin and his companions began to enjoy their meat feast. It was delicious. The next day the battle officially commenced. However, this statement is not entirely accurate, as the Battle of the Mechs had already begun while the infantry's combat had successfully ignited the night before. The elite infantry had already initiated their actions the previous night, crossing the enemy's minefields and infiltrating the outer defensive lines of the steel factory. After eliminating some enemies, these elite infantry could not avoid engaging in combat with the enemy forces inside the steel factory. Now, after a night of fierce fighting, these elite infantry had occupied several small defensive strongholds waiting for reinforcements from their follow-up units. These strongholds could be remnants of a collapsed building, a metal furnace, or a corner of a workshop. Nighttime combat is perilous, a fact true for both the defenders and the attackers. Once these elite infantry occupied the strongholds within the steel factory, the roles of attacker and defender switched. The enemy could only begin their assault on these strongholds to clear out the infantry. Night was evidently not a good time for such actions, thus the daytime battle gradually intensified. In a conference room, Jianglu continued his instruction to Li Xin. Our enemy is the Milder Knight Brigade, however this may merely be a small squad of knights from the Milder Knight Brigade. According to intelligence, the forces stationed inside the steel factory should be their retinue comparable in level to our Hengan Defense Company. Within this Beishimo steel factory there are at least 1 infantry brigade and some reinforced armored units totaling about 5,500 personnel. Of course, the combat capability of these Milder retinue infantry is not something we should take lightly. If it were only these troops, just our 3 mechs could eradicate all visible enemies given some time, unless there are some hiding in places inaccessible to mechs. Our true enemies are the knights of the Milder Brigade. Like us, they belong to the mecha unit. A projection of a mecha appeared on the screen before Jianglu. Pointing at it, he said, "I believe you have already reviewed the information on this mecha, but I will reiterate. This mecha in terms of classification corresponds to the short sword retinue mecha and is also classified as Grade D. Knight retinue mecha? As a Grade D mecha, both the Milder Knight Brigade and our Blueprint Biotech Group have nearly perfected the development of this level of mecha. The attributes of both mecha types are similar, although their focuses differ. The short sword retinue is a versatile mecha model excelling in long-range combat, fire support and close-quarters combat. However, as you know, the antonym of versatility is mediocrity. In contrast, the Knight retinue mecha leans more towards melee combat. This is particularly crucial for you to note, as your melee capabilities are your weakest point." Jianglu cast a deep glance at Li Xin. Li Xin had no intention of arguing, for Jianglu's statements were undeniably true. His melee skills were indeed lacking. After all, having only 19 days of learning and training, managing to pilot a mecha into battle was already quite an achievement. Melee practice in a mecha requires a significant investment of time. Within the chip's internal ranking, Li Xin's melee level experience is classified as D1, indicating a novice state. His remote weapon handling and combat level experience is rated D2, just slightly better than a beginner. This is still due to his possession of 2 chips and the particularly effective energy chip, which contributed to his current results. After observing Li Xin, Jianglu continued to explain Knight retinues are a group of melee fanatics. Their remote weaponry is exceedingly simple, inferior even to that of a tank. By discarding long-range attacks, they free up a lot of space within their mechs, which they enhance for melee combat. Their physical strength is greater, their speed is faster, and due to their lack of long-range capabilities, their void shields are also stronger, capable of withstanding more firepower. These fellows typically wield long-handled power axes or power poles, which is somewhat similar to your setup. The most critical point is that they outnumber us. As Jiang Lu spoke, his tone grew serious. Outnumber? By how much? Li Xin inquired. Feng Dai sighed and said each of their combat squads consists of 5 mechs. So you understand now? In large-scale battles such combat squads don't differ much, but in a battlefield like Beishimo Steel Factory their numbers usually confer an advantage. Jiang Lu interrupted Feng Dai, who was about to continue, saying don't listen to his alarmist rhetoric. Continuous battles mean not only are our numbers insufficient but the enemies are as well. In the last battle for Beishimo the opposing squads were also not at full strength, so there's no need to worry too much. Feng Dai nodded in agreement, saying Li Xin, you are fortunate to join our squad. Our leader has stronger energy, significantly boosting our mechs, and is renowned for his melee prowess. These knight retinues even 2 against 1 cannot overpower the leader. Last time he even managed to kill 1 in a 2-known situation. Perhaps this time you can just use the cannon to clear out the enemy's long-range fire support and the battle will conclude. Li Xin's tension eased a bit as he smiled and said if that's the case that would be the best. Meanwhile their meeting coincided with a heated offensive against Beishimo Steel Factory. Outside the forward base, artillery units had already set up heavy howitzers and a barrage of artillery fire began a fierce bombardment on the outer defenses of the Milda Infantry Brigade. This powerful artillery fire lasted a full 6 hours, plowing through the entire outer defenses of the Beishimo Steel Factory with large shells. Such heavy bombardment had limited lethality against the enemy. Apart from turning some ruins into more dilapidated rubble, it had little significant effect. Let alone the extensive tunnels beneath Beishimo Steel Factory. Even among the surface buildings there could be well-hidden enemy soldiers beneath the rubble. The greater purpose of this bombardment was to clear out the traps and mines that the enemy had laid in the outer area. It was often observed that a single grenade explosion would trigger a chain of detonations across the area, setting off the anti-tank mines buried by the enemy. Amidst a hail of shrapnel and raging flames, everything around was engulfed in the blast wave and fire. Within his mecha, Li Xin watched this explosive scene through the machine's remote observation equipment. These anti-tank mines still had some effect against armored vehicles and tanks, but against mechs their impact was far more limited. Low-yield mines could hardly inflict significant damage on a mecha, while those with a larger charge were easily detected by the mech's sensors. The reason the mechs had not yet launched their attack was that they were waiting for the ground infantry and armored units to advance together. Though formidable mechs were vulnerable if surrounded and overwhelmed. At present the entire Blueprint Expeditionary Force stationed at Hengan Defense had only 23 mechs available, so they had to be used sparingly. The vanguard of the assault consisted of an armored combined arms battalion from Hengan Defense accompanied by 2 infantry battalions. Their objective was to breach the outer defenses of the Beishimo Steelworks, while the mecha units would provide fire support and precisely target enemy strongpoints. On the front line, a tank company had completed its pre-battle preparations. The tanks of Hengan Defense were the same models that Li Xin had once driven. The model was the Stag Hunter tank. This medium tank was equipped with a 120mm electromagnetic cannon as its primary weapon and a 14.5mm electromagnetic machine gun as its secondary armament. Against a mecha like the short-sword Squire without a void shield, even a few hits from this main gun would prove devastating. The same applied to enemy tanks. Generally, the firepower of such tanks was so potent that even their own armor could not withstand a direct hit. A single accurate shot would turn the target into a cantin. A tank platoon of Hengan Defense consisted of 3 standard Stag Hunter tanks and 1 command variant. 3 tank platoons along with a separate command Stag Hunter formed a tank company totaling 13 tanks. An armored combined arms battalion comprised 1 tank company and 2 armored infantry companies. The vehicles used by the armored companies were the short-tailed rat infantry fighting vehicles. These IFVs were armed with a 20mm electromagnetic autocannon as their primary weapon. Their armor could withstand standard electromagnetic rifles and laser rifles and offered decent protection against rapid-fire weapons under 20mm caliber. Each IFV could also carry 8 infantrymen who would dismount to engage in combat upon reaching the battlefield. Every 3 short-tailed rats formed an armored squad. 3 armored squads made up an armored company with an additional command short-tailed rat. In total, an armored combined arms battalion of Hengan Defense possessed 13 Stag Hunter tanks and 20 short-tailed rat infantry fighting vehicles. It also had 160 elite armored infantry. Such an organization was quite impressive within Hengan Defense, especially compared to the other 2 infantry battalions whose combat formations were far inferior. The infantry battalion was organized as follows: every 10 soldiers formed a rifle squad with 1 squad leader and 1 assistant squad leader. In terms of weaponry, each squad had 5 to 7 riflemen typically armed with X-49 rifles, though occasionally 1 or 2 V-12 electromagnetic rifles might appear. There were 1 to 2 machine gunners using the 12.5mm N6 general-purpose electromagnetic machine gun. 1 to 2 soldiers formed an anti-tank armor team equipped with the 88mm L3 electromagnetic armor-piercing cannon or anti-tank missiles. There was 1 medic. 3 squads made up a platoon with 1 platoon leader commanding the entire unit and 1 assistant platoon leader supporting him. A platoon consisted of 32 soldiers. 3 platoons formed an infantry company with 1 company commander responsible for overall command and 1 assistant company commander aiding in operations, tactical execution and training. The company headquarters also included 2 communicators, 2 clerks and a mess squad. A company had 112 soldiers. An infantry battalion comprised 3 such companies. The battalion headquarters had 1 battalion commander responsible for overall command and coordination and 1 assistant battalion commander who assisted in tactical deployment and training. There was 1 battalion chief of staff tasked with operational planning, intelligence analysis and communications. The battalion staff section consisted of 3 to 5 personnel including operations, logistics and communications staff officers. The battalion's direct subordinate units included a guard squad, a communication squad and a reconnaissance squad. Altogether, an infantry battalion had an authorized strength of approximately 375 soldiers. Of course, this was the ideal composition of an infantry battalion. In most cases the unit was under strength with troop numbers sometimes fewer and occasionally slightly more. As it stood after prolonged combat, each of these infantry battalions had only around 300 soldiers in total. The Stag Hunter tanks ahead had formed a small wedge formation. Their engines had already ignited, a rumbling roar echoing across the surroundings. Inside his mecha, Li Xin used the control stick to maneuver the machine, following Jiang Lu to the rear of the tank column. The attack sequence was as follows: Tank Company, Mechs, Armored Infantry Company, Infantry Battalions. The tank company commander's earpiece crackled with the command from headquarters: move out. Move out. Rumble, rumble, rumble. The 13 Stag Hunter tanks' road wheels began to turn, their tracks gripping the ground as they slowly accelerated. On the terrain around the Beishimo steelworks, these Stag Hunter tanks could maintain a speed of 70 km per hour, a remarkably fast pace on the battlefield. Thick clouds of dust were churned up by the tank tracks. These vehicles advanced like a line of dragons charging straight toward the Beishimo steelworks. Li Xin looked down at the short-tailed rat armored personnel carriers beside him. These wheeled vehicles had also started their engines, following the tanks as they set out. We move out too. Jiang Lu's command came through Li Xin's earpiece. The 3 of them followed alongside the APCs advancing toward the Beishimo steelworks. Inside the cockpit, Li Xin placed his hands on the armrests. A faint glimmer of psionic energy flickered in his eyes as he entered a state of psionic piloting. When not in combat mode, the mecha could reach a speed of 80 km per hour, matching the pace of the tanks and wheeled armored vehicles. Only when entering combat mode, due to the need to allocate more energy to other systems and ensure greater stability during battle, did the speed decrease slightly. The short-sword squire began to move its heavy footsteps thudding across the land. The mecha did not walk but ran like a human. It almost seemed to leap forward with each stride, covering 20 to 30 meters at a time. Their void shields remained active, ready to defend against attacks from any direction. The 6-barreled electromagnetic machine cannon on the mech's left arm, along with the 85mm plasma cannon, remained primed and ready. When needed, they could open fire immediately. Deep beneath the Behemoth steelworks, within a concealed underground chamber brightly lit and transformed into the command center of the Murder Servant Army. Inside the command center, a holographic projection displayed a partial map of the Behemoth steelworks, surrounded by over a dozen operations staff busily compiling various data. Directly before the holographic projection, the image showed the advancing Deer Hunter tanks, short-sword servant mechs and short-tailed mouse armored personnel carriers. Though not perfectly aligned with the ground reality, it was remarkably close to their actual positions. The leading Deer Hunters had already covered nearly half the distance to the Behemoth steelworks. Before the holographic map stood a middle-aged man in tactical uniform holding a lightweight knightly sword. He was the supreme commander here, the 523rd Motorized Infantry Brigade's commander, Roy. Roy pointed his knightly sword at the 13 leading Deer Hunters and said, "It seems these corporate men truly act as if we don't exist," swaggering straight toward the steelworks. "Let's show them a thing or two." "Yes, sir." A nearby operations staff officer immediately responded, then walked aside to contact frontline units. Within the outer defensive perimeter of the Behemoth steelworks, though some elite infantry from Hengan Security had seized a few small strongpoints, the vast majority of the outer perimeter remained under the control of the Murder Servant Legion. Even the sustained bombardment from heavy howitzers had inflicted minimal casualties on them. As combat orders were issued, defensive soldiers began appearing at one small strongpoint after another along the front line. Inside a collapsed 3-story building, an entire infantry anti-tank team was stationed. The organization of the Murder Servant Army was much like that of Hengan Security. An infantry anti-tank team also consisted of 2 to 3 soldiers. They had already deployed an electromagnetic anti-tank cannon, its power pack connected and the muzzle beginning to charge. After being bombarded by those corporate dogs for so long, it's our turn to vent some steam. A soldier operating the targeting system laughed loudly. His assistant loading an armor-piercing shell glanced up and said, "This time we'll definitely crack those tanks open." In contrast to their relaxed demeanor, a nearby soldier stood stiffly. The one manning the anti-tank cannon was a veteran, while the one waiting beside was a greenhorn. This protracted battle had severely drained not only the veterans of Blueprint Biotechnology and Hengan Security but also those of the Murder Knights and Servant Corps. Yet in defensive operations, rookies could still play a role. They needed few complex tactical maneuvers just to lock the enemy in their sights and pull the trigger. Meanwhile, in the command center of the Hengan Security Forward Base, Lu Quan was coordinating operations with Ji Jizhuan, the Hengan Security Commander, for this mission. Ji Jizhuan was the commander of this Hengan Security Composite Brigade, fully responsible for the assault on the Behemoth Steelworks, though Lu Quan held higher authority. Ji Jizhuan studied the positions of the tanks and armored units, then after a moment's deliberation instructed the Chief of Staff, "The positions are about right. Order the artillery to release smoke shells, then fire a full base load of ammunition." Turning to Lu Quan, he added, "Director Lu, we'll need the mech units to put in extra effort this time. After the bombardment, I need the mech units to overtake the tanks and be the first to breach the outer perimeter, clearing out the enemy there. The tank and armored companies will follow close behind the mechs, ready to provide support." Lu Quan glanced at the holographic map and nodded, "No problem." Soon orders from the rear command center were relayed to all combat units. At various artillery positions on the outskirts of the forward base, gunners loaded special smoke shells into the breaches. Boom! With the roar of heavy artillery, one large smoke shell after another fitted with delayed fuses flew toward the outer perimeter of the Behemoth Steelworks. Boom! These massive smoke shells detonated midair, unleashing billowing black clouds that instantly engulfed the surroundings, completely obscuring Hengan Security's entire line of advance and the tanks behind. The smoke even had a certain jamming effect on radar, leaving the waiting defenders in the outer perimeter of the Behemoth Steelworks completely blind. The smoke screen would last only 2 to 3 minutes in such an open area. But 2 to 3 minutes was enough to accomplish a great deal. The veteran operating the electromagnetic anti-tank cannon looked up from his sighting device in bewilderment, staring at the pitch-black haze ahead and cursing, "Damn it, these corporate bastards are pulling this trick again." The smoke lay just over 200 meters beyond the outer perimeter. If the anti-tank infantry wanted to engage the tanks, they would have to exploit that 200-meter gap. "You two keep your eyes peeled. Shout when you see the tanks." "Yes, sir." Both the veteran and the rookies replied in unison. Within the smoke, Li Xin heard Lu Quan's voice. "Attention all teams. Mission change. Teams for 5, 6, and 7 prepare for assault operations. Attack sectors C-32, C-33, C-34, and C-35 respectively. Clear all enemy defenders in those areas and open a breach in the defense line for the follow-up armored units." "Orders received," Jiang Lu's voice replied. Alongside Jiang Lu were several other team leaders. Until these leaders withdrew from combat, their team members had no authority to speak directly with Lu Quan. They could only passively receive commands. Inside his cockpit, Jiang Lu glanced toward Li Xin's mech and announced, "All squad. Adopt third combat posture and commence assault. 02, roger? 03 or roger." The 3 mechs almost instantly changed their standing positions. Jiang Lu and Feng De's mechs took the lead, with Li Xin's mech slightly behind. Their positions were relatively spread out, each mech separated by over 100 meters. "Charge!" Jiang Lu's steady voice echoed in Li Xin's ears. Li Xin took a deep breath, immersing himself entirely in piloting the mech. Bam! The mech launched into a sudden sprint, striding in large bounds toward the outer perimeter of the Behemoth Steelworks. 03, this is your first real combat. Keep an eye on your combat radar and psionic energy. Don't hesitate, eliminate all threatening targets. 01, roger? Li Xin gritted his teeth in the cockpit as he responded. Dozens of tons of machinery, even though the mech's feet are equipped with ample shock absorption and soundproofing, the sound remains remarkably loud when charging. However, the heavy artillery in the rear has now opened fire, launching bombardments on the enemy's frontline positions, masking the sounds of the mech's movements. Li Xin's short sword attendant with its 6-barrel machine gun and 85mm plasma cannon on its left arm are fully charged and ready to unleash a barrage upon detecting the enemy. In his 2 lifetimes, this is the first time he is truly stepping onto the battlefield. Although he had often boasted in the past without having been in battle, now feeling the atmosphere of war, Li Xin finds his palms sweating. Although Jiang Lu and Feng De's mechs are ahead of Li Xin, they are only a few dozen meters away, and the distances between the 3 of them are all over 100 meters. Calculating it out, Li Xin still has to face part of the enemy's attack directly. After the artillery bombardment ends, prepare. Jiang Lu's voice timely reaches Li Xin's ears as the mech is about to charge out of the smoke screen. Thud! A menacing mechanical construct burst forth from the dark smoke. In the position of the Milder infantry anti-tank squad, a rookie pointed in Li Xin's direction and shouted, "Thief!" charged out. The veteran operator reacted almost instantly, aiming the targeting device at Li Xin's mech. "Fuck!" The veteran exploded in rage, roaring. This anger was not only directed at the mech but also at the rookie. Almost at the first moment the anti-tank targeting device locked onto Li Xin, both Li Xin's psychic chip and the mech's combat radar responded simultaneously. Enemy locked. Enemy locked. The biological intelligence chip in his mind responded almost instantly, assisting Li Xin in battle and locking onto the target, aiming at him. 3 target units were identified: a collapsed 3-story building, a twisted metal wreck, and what appeared to be a saw. Boom. The first target, the 3-story building, opened fire first with an electromagnetic anti-tank shell roaring out, accompanied by a crackle of electricity. It hit the void shield of Li Xin's mech. The void shield surrounding the mech instantly activated, lighting up a honeycomb-like pattern, and ripples appeared on the surface of the void shield. The electromagnetic anti-tank shell failed to penetrate the enemy's void shield. The veteran in the defensive position, upon spotting the mech, had already cursed the rookie's ancestors for 18 generations in his heart. The electromagnetic anti-tank cannon could penetrate the void shield, but not by a single cannon alone. Once the mech realized it was locked on, the only thing awaiting them would be the relentless counterfire from the mech. In the moment they pulled the trigger, the 2 veterans almost simultaneously turned to flee. But it was too late. Assisted by dual military-grade chips, Li Xin almost instantaneously redirected the 6-barrel machine gun of his short sword attendant. Buzz? Rat-a-tat-tat! Accompanied by a faint electronic buzzing, a series of fire tongues spewed from the 6-barrel machine gun. Each 20mm shell shot out from the barrel, crackling with electricity, accurately passing through the gap and hitting inside the defensive position. At the same time, Li Xin didn't even look at the subsequent reactions, but swiftly adjusted the gun barrel toward the second target, the twisted metal wreck. Rat-a-tat-tat! Lastly, at a position resembling a saw where the machine gun had difficulties attacking, the mech's main cannon responded immediately. Sizzle! A burst of electrically charged plasma shot out from the main cannon, sparkling and striking that saw. Li Xin's psychic-controlled short sword attendant completed the entire process, from being locked on to locking onto the enemy to firing in less than 3 seconds. Rumble! 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 Almost simultaneously the 3 targets erupted with tremendous explosions. The already collapsed 3-story building was reduced to a complete ruin, and in a flash the small gap that fired the electromagnetic anti-tank shells was hit by at least a dozen electromagnetic shells. At this point both the rookie and the veterans became nothing more than tomato paste. Even the fastest reacting veteran could not escape to safety. The second target, the twisted metal wreck, was blown to pieces with fragments of steel and rebar scattered everywhere. Keen observers could even see flying limbs clad in tactical camouflage. The third target fared even worse. The power of the plasma cannon was tremendous, as the saw was buried underground, making it easy for normal artillery to be intercepted. However, the plasma had no such flaws. Explosions, flames and electricity nearly engulfed the entire dark saw. The soldiers lying in ambush inside were almost instantly pierced through the heart by the high-pressure current, regardless of whether they wore armor or what type it was. Then the plasma explosion turned their entire bodies to charcoal, and even the saw was collapsed and shattered, creating a massive pit on the spot. In this counterattack, Li Xin had no chance to feel any sympathy, reflexively eliminating all the enemies in an instant. As the 6-barrel machine gun ceased fire and the plasma cannon began recharging, Li Xin finally reacted. Looking at the blood mist rising from the 2 positions ahead, he sighed and continued to pilot the mech forward. This is war, a war of survival. Beside him, Jiang Lu fought while observing Li Xin's state. After witnessing Li Xin's combat response, Jiang Lu silently nodded, saying nothing more. The 3 mechs began their sweeping mode, and almost all the ambushed Milder soldiers started to flee upon first spotting the mech. Those who could escape almost immediately began to run. They could barely handle tanks and armored vehicles, but facing mechs taking a few slower steps would lead to a completely different outcome. Target detected. Li Xin's mind received a new location from the psychic intelligence chip. That position was at least 200 or 300 meters away from the mech, and it appeared to be a sniper who hadn't managed to withdraw. A direct confrontation. Li Xin's short sword attendant raised its left arm, and after the 85mm plasma cannon was fully charged, the chip projected a reticle in front of Li Xin's eyes. He aligned the target within the crosshairs. Sizzle. Boom. A shot fired, engulfing the sniper's position with plasma, violently tearing apart the surrounding buildings. As for the sniper, Li Xin no longer paid attention. He should now be referred to as that lump of a sniper. Combat indeed proved to be the most effective method for mastering new skills. At this moment, Li Xin felt his control over the mecha had advanced a step further. The sword attendant mecha weaved through the ruins. The entire C-33 combat zone was not particularly vast, and 3 mechs swept through it with ease. As they neutralized one defensive position after another on the ground, Li Xin even spotted the elite infantry from Hengan Security who had entered the area the previous night along with the defensive strongholds they had seized. Thanks to the friend or foe identification system, these infantrymen were fortunate to escape Li Xin's autocannon and plasma cannon fire. As for the unfortunate Millida soldiers discovered by Li Xin, they met a grim fate. At the rear, while the mecha units cleared the forward combat zone, Hengan Security's tank company and armored infantry company successfully traversed the smoke, heading straight for the Beishimo steelworks. The Mechs, which had advanced somewhat deeper, also returned at this moment, regrouping beside the tanks and armored vehicles. Though powerful Mechs were not invincible, if they pushed too deep without support they risked being surrounded and overwhelmed. Even ordinary infantry with sustained heavy firepower could inflict damage on a mecha. For instance, concentrating a dozen anti-tank electromagnetic cannons or a few heavy artillery pieces to focus fire on a mecha's void shield. Such a concentrated assault could overload the void shield, leaving the mecha reliant solely on its armor, which could not withstand many armor-piercing rounds. Upon reaching the outer defensive line of the Beishimo steelworks, the elite armored infantry from the short-tailed rat infantry fighting vehicles swiftly disembarked, maintaining combat formation as they deployed rapidly. Within the 4 cleared zones nearby, they began constructing their own defensive strongholds and establishing crossfire positions. The battle had only just begun. The surface of the Beishimo steelworks alone was divided into hundreds of combat zones. Having secured only 4 so far, arduous fighting still lay ahead to fully capture the steelworks. Moreover, this was merely the surface combat area. The underground environment of the Beishimo steelworks was far more complex, and seizing it would incur heavy casualties. Among the follow-up forces, 2 infantry battalions began entering the combat zone, though their vehicles were inferior to those of the first wave of armored infantry. These motorized infantry battalions relied on ordinary jeeps or large trucks as their transports. Their weapons were also a grade lower, but fortunately under the cover of smoke they encountered no retaliation and successfully reached the Beishimo steelworks. Inside the mecha cockpit, Jiang Lu's voice rang out. 03, how do you feel? 01's feeling good. Li Xin's voice was steady, the initial tension in his heart now gone. Keep it up. The battle has just begun. Yes. In the underground command center of the Millida servant army. The commander here wore a calm expression, as if the captured positions and fallen soldiers were not his concern. I didn't expect them to deploy Mechs directly. Beside him, the motorized brigade's chief of staff gritted his teeth. In this assault on 4 combat zones, at least dozens of soldiers who had been forced to counterattack or failed to escape had been killed. These soldiers had been waiting for the tanks and armored vehicles to lead the charge, intending to strike hard only to be hit hard themselves. The battle has just begun, and they've already sent out Mechs. Prepare the front lines, well, play a slow game with their Mechs. Let's see how much spiritual energy they have to spare. Colonel Roy issued new orders with a composed demeanor. These orders seemed light and easy, but for the soldiers tasked with carrying them out they were anything but. Every word from Roy's mouth might cost several lives. Inside the Beishimo steelworks. After securing a foothold in the 4 captured combat zones, Hengan Security soldiers began attacking the adjacent zones on both sides. They needed to expand their positions as much as possible, killing enemy soldiers and seizing their strongholds. As infantry and armored units launched their assault, the Mechs had to follow suit, with infantry and armor acting as bait and scouts to lure out hidden enemies. It might sound cruel, but it was standard warfare. Even without Mechs, these infantry and armored units would have to fight this way. With mecha support, their casualty rates actually decreased. At this stage of the battle, not every mecha was required to sortie. For instance, the Mechs of the 5th group began rotating, deploying 1 mecha at a time to accompany the infantry. The other 2 Mechs, of course, were not completely idle. They followed at a distance using control sticks instead of spiritual energy connections. This way the leading mecha could handle simple engagements without the trailing 2 consuming spiritual energy. However, if the fighting intensified or a high-value target was discovered, they could join the fray immediately. Accompanying the 2 trailing Mechs were 4 auxiliary squads from the 5th group. They drove tracked armored vehicles carrying ammunition and soldiers. The electromagnetic autocannons on the vehicles were manned by soldiers who remained vigilant of their surroundings. Should any anomaly arise, they would open fire, instantly delivering a barrage. At this moment it was Li Xin accompanying the infantry, while Jiang Lu and Feng Dai had taken the previous 2 rotations. Seated in the cockpit, Li Xin followed the infantry at a moderate distance, ready to provide support at a moment's notice. Of course, the forward force consisted not only of infantry but also a stag hunter leading, followed by 3 short-tailed rats. Infantry and tanks coordinated with soldiers spread out on both sides in squads of 3 or 4. Each squad was spaced 20 to 30 meters apart. This distance prevented a single ambush from wiping them out while ensuring dense firepower. The stag hunter led the charge while the short-tailed rats maneuvered to provide fire support. As for why the Mechs didn't take the lead, the reason was simple. If a mecha appeared on the front line, the enemy would simply go to ground. They would hide like rats, rendering a full sweep of the Beishimo steelworks useless for capturing this major stronghold. Securing this location required not only taking ground but also eliminating the enemy's effective strength. A company was accompanying the battle with the commander conducting pre-battle commands from the mid-rear. The roar of tank engines echoed through the ruins while fire control radar scanned the surroundings. On the flank, an infantry fire team swiftly advanced and entered a small ruin. The assault trooper tossed a grenade inside, and after the explosion they quickly stormed in. The team inspected the small ruin and confirmed it was temporarily secure. They began establishing a simple defensive line here. At least for the next few hours they could hold this position. The pace of war was far slower than imagined. It wasn't like what Lishin had seen on TV in his past life, where a tough guy could just mow down enemy fortifications one by one with a machine gun. Although mechs could indeed do that, if an enemy so much as showed their head, Lishin's autocannon or even electromagnetic cannon could react instantly. But that required the enemy to show themselves. The behemoth steel mill was a pure urban warfare environment, and such an environment couldn't be cleared just by bombarding it with heavy artillery or bombers before moving in. The previous assaults and defenses had turned the steel mill into a massive ruin. No matter how much firepower was poured in or how much it was bombed, it remained a ruin. Only the positions of the rubble changed. This was an urban ruin battlefield with countless places for enemies to hide. When the enemy didn't show themselves, even if Lishin fired a plasma cannon at every possible hiding spot, he couldn't harm them in the slightest. Life was precious. The infantry's movements required finding cover at every step. Every street, every alley, every ruin they passed could conceal an enemy. These soldiers of Hengan security weren't cabbages. They could die, they could be cannon fodder, but their deaths had to have value. Advancing to a single position required at least 10 minutes of peripheral reconnaissance, and if there were places to hide inside, even more time was needed for clearance. The infantry's advance was far slower than expected. Ahead, a fire team of quickly crossed a street, but a gun barrel emerged from a spot about 100 meters away. A burst of bullets fired from the barrel, instantly dropping one soldier. The electromagnetic gun's projectile tore the soldier's upper body apart, leaving him dead beyond recovery. Of the other three, one charged forward while the other two retreated to the previous cover. A fire team was thus split in two. Call for support. Call for armored support. The fire team leader shouted into his earpiece. The Deer Hunter tank not far behind quickly revved its engine and sped forward. The 120mm electromagnetic cannon aimed at the spot where the enemy had fired and instantly discharged a round shot out, striking the small fortification. The high explosive shell blasted the fortification into the air, but it seemed empty inside. The enemy infantry had swiftly relocated after firing. But infantry couldn't run far unless there was an underground tunnel. The Deer Hunter quickly moved its track, spinning at high speed, approaching the explosion site to search for the enemy's escape route. A short-tailed rat also moved in for support, its autocannon beginning a dense barrage on potential hiding spots. The autocannon swept across every window, ruin, and cave that could conceal an enemy. But after the indiscriminate fire, no trace of the enemy was found. Under the cover of armored vehicles, the infantry team quickly collected the body of their fallen comrade and loaded it into the rear of the vehicle. Though the soldier was dead, the body had to be recovered to avoid demoralizing the troops. Lishin, positioned slightly to the rear, looked at the blood-soaked ground ahead and let out an almost imperceptible sigh. This was war, modern war. Even with the emergence of mechs as new combat weapons, infantry remained the branch with the highest casualty rate on the battlefield. The soldiers continued their advance and Lishin maneuvered his mech forward. Though he hadn't fired, the mere presence of the mech posed a significant threat to the enemy. As Lishin passed the site of the recent firefight, his psionic chip and the mech scanners detected a faint anomaly below, just a hint, as the radar showed no signs of life. Beneath the ruins blasted by the tank's high explosive shell, there was a small, hastily dug pit. Inside, a soldier of the Murder Auxiliary Forces crouched, wearing urban camouflage and a lightweight bulletproof vest. Such a vest could only withstand a few gunpowder bullets and offered little resistance against electromagnetic rounds. Its defensive capability in this war's intensity was almost negligible. He also wore an expensive blanket that could block electromagnetic signals, thermal imaging, and even psionic energy. That was the veteran's reliance for not fleeing after the fight. If he had tried to escape, he would likely have died on the run. The Deer Hunter tank hadn't given him time to escape. Now the veteran huddled below, listening to the heavy footsteps nearby. He knew it was an enemy mech approaching. At that moment the veteran showed even greater composure, slowing his breathing and even consciously regulating his heartbeat. He trusted his concealment methods, and with the ruins above blasted by the tank's high explosive shell, even escaping would be difficult. Surely no one would check again. Aboard the mech, Lishin had paused, sensing something off. He was about to leave but stopped again. The power halberd on the right arm activated its disintegration field, the sturdy blade glowing with a faint blue light. Lishin controlled the halberd with ease, thrusting it fiercely into the ruins below. The ruins were pierced through bricks, concrete, and rebar, all shattered. The veteran below froze in terror, for the blue blade was less than a meter away. If he raised his head he could even see the faint blue disintegration field on the halberd. The power halberd retracted and the murder auxiliary veteran quietly breathed a sigh of relief. He sneered inwardly, what a lousy mech, still couldn't find me. But the next moment a plasma cannon round poured in through the hole left by the halberd. Above, the infantry on both flanks watched as Li Xin's mecha continued to advance. Its left arm had just fired a devastating plasma cannon shot into the ruins below. Now that patch of rubble was upturned by the sheer force of the blast shockwave. For Li Xin, a single plasma cannon shot was negligible and the mech's energy reserves were exceptionally ample. Such an attack barely dented its endurance. After all, the energy costs were covered by the corporation, not coming out of his own pocket. Before firing, Li Xin wasn't even certain if enemies lurked below, yet he still pulled the trigger. As the mecha moved past, an infantry squad trailing behind arrived at the spot where Li Xin's mecha had just opened fire. A soldier knelt on one knee scanning the area, then peered down. With that single glance he saw the devastation wrought by the plasma cannon. The fissures below had been widened several times over. The bricks within had been pulverized into dust, but the sharp-eyed soldier still spotted fragments of a rifle. He pulled back his head and murmured, there really was someone in there. What a gruesome death. His squad leader, taking cover behind a barricade ahead, glanced at the mecha's left arm and remarked, gruesome. This is hardly gruesome, they died in an instant without any pain. Now getting killed by a rifle, that's the real tragedy. The soldier, who had been inspecting the area, quickly moved forward, reaching the cover of the barricade before sighing, you said it. They were obliterated in a flash, their bodies probably didn't even register it. If I had a choice, I'd want to go the same way. His squad leader smacked him on the helmet and said, you want to die? Then keep dreaming. I choose to live well and find a few women back home. The soldier, steadying his helmet, paused and chuckled, right. My bad. He'll find a few women too. Suddenly, with a piercing shriek, an anti-tank missile trailing red flames hurtled toward the hunter. This action seemed to unleash a wave of resistance. The enemy had chosen an excellent ambush spot here, surrounded by relatively tall ruined buildings with tanks and armored vehicles passing through the center. Facing the incoming anti-tank missile, the hunter released countermeasures almost instantly, but to no avail. The missile struck the tank, piercing straight through its armor and detonating inside, effectively opening the entire turret. The turret was blasted dozens of meters into the air. Not only was the lead tank decapitated, but the short-tailed mouse armored vehicle was also rapidly reversing, with intense firepower from the front chasing them down. Ambush. Ambush. Requesting support. The infantry scrambled for cover, ducking their heads low and firing blindly toward potential enemy positions. It was all suppressive fire, a desperate act. Caught in an ambush, anyone daring to pop up risked catching a bullet. One armored infantryman clad in a red Seal 2 half-face helmet had been advancing alongside the short-tailed mouse for infantry-tank coordination. But when the attack came, he had no chance to evade. The enemy's concentrated fire and autocannon rounds turned him into a mist of blood. Li Xin, trailing behind, activated his mecha in an instant. His short sword attendant lunged forward with a giant stride onto a pile of brick ruins, its void shield fully activated. The six-barreled autocannon began to spin as he overtook the retreating short-tailed mouse, knowing that under this heavy fire the vehicle's only option was to flee or be blown apart. The enemy's firepower composition included not only infantry weapons but also twin-mounted autocannons, tanks and armored vehicles. This counterattack involved at least 2 tanks, 5 armored vehicles and over 100 infantry. The enemy tanks were YR6 mediums and their armored vehicles were KR4 wheeled APCs. The two sides exchanged fire in this cramped space. Li Xin's mecha surged past the armored vehicle, quickly locked onto the enemy ahead and opened fire with its 6-barreled auto. In the next instant, a hail of autocannon rounds erupted from the mecha's left arm, lashing out like a whip toward the enemy armored vehicle. An autocannon operator in a murder-attendant armored vehicle, driven to a frenzy, glared with bloodshot eyes as he traded fire with Li Xin. But the outcome was inevitable. Li Xin's mecha was shielded by its void barrier. Whether from infantry guns, tanks or armored vehicle autocannons, all were stopped by the void shield. However, Li Xin's autocannon rounds, unimpeded by any shield, struck a wheeled armored vehicle like a fiery whip. The thin armor of the wheeled APC was utterly incapable of withstanding such firepower. It was pierced and the entire vehicle detonated from within. Li Xin's 6-barreled autocannon didn't even cease fire. The fiery whip of rounds quickly shifted direction and lashed into another armored vehicle. From the moment Li Xin reacted to joining the fray and destroying 2 armored vehicles, less than a minute had passed. Then he maneuvered the mecha to quickly retreat behind a tall ruined building. Facing the enemy's concentrated fire, whether the autocannon barrages or the tank's electromagnetic cannon blasts, placed immense strain on the mecha's void shield. Li Xin had no desire for his void shield to overload. After pulling back, he began to fire his autocannon in controlled bursts. From here he could avoid most of the incoming fire. Watching his void shield's defense value recover, the heart that had nearly leaped from his chest settled back down. At that moment Jiang Lu's voice crackled in his earpiece, nearly roaring, 03, don't just stand there and shoot, keep your mecha moving. Are you a turret letting them hammer you? Li Xin suddenly realized why his void shield had drained so quick. Indeed, a greenhorn on the battlefield still exposed many flaws. Sometimes focusing on one thing meant neglecting another. Looking back, the enemy's wheeled armored vehicles had been firing while moving, which had wasted a lot of Li Xin's ammunition. Yet Li Xin, whose mecha should have been the most agile asset on this battlefield, hadn't made any evasive moves, acting instead like a stationary turret. How pathetic.